I didn't think a random weekday evening could turn into something that sticks in your head like this, but it did, and it wasn't because anything dramatic happened on the surface. It was more like the kind of night where everything looks normal while it's happening, and then later you realize you were missing half the picture the whole time. I met Emily at this bar near the river that I'd been to a couple times before. Nothing special about it, just low lighting, slightly sticky tables, music that's loud enough to cover silence but not loud enough to stop thinking. It was one of those places where people go when they don't want the night to feel like a big deal. She was already there when I arrived, sitting slightly turned away from the entrance like she wasn't waiting for anything in particular. That alone made it feel easier. No pressure, no obvious expectation. I remember noticing how normal she looked in the setting, like she belonged there more than I did. We started talking in that slow way people do when they're still deciding how much effort they want to put in. At first, it was simple stuff, nothing deep. I wasn't trying to impress her, and she didn't seem like she was trying either. That balance made the conversation flow without forcing it. It didn't feel like an interview or anything structured, just two people passing time. The bar was busy but not packed. Glasses clinking, chairs scraping, background noise filling in gaps that would otherwise feel awkward. I remember thinking the night might just stay like that, flat but comfortable. At some point, I got up to use the restroom. It wasn't planned, just one of those things you do without thinking. I left my phone on the table because I wasn't worried about it. The place didn't feel like the kind where you needed to keep checking your pockets every few minutes. The walk to the restroom was short, just down a narrow hallway with slightly too bright lights compared to the rest of the place. I didn't rush. Nothing about the night suggested I needed to. Coming back was where the shift started, even though I didn't notice it right away. Emily was in the same spot, same posture, same general look, but something about her attention felt tighter. Not obvious at first, just subtle, like the randomness had been turned down a bit. She wasn't scanning the room anymore. She was locked in a bit more on me than before, like the version of me she was responding to had changed slightly while I was gone. I sat back down and kept going like nothing had happened. That's the default thing you do when there's no reason to think otherwise. The conversation continued, but I started noticing small differences. She didn't ask questions in the same way anymore. It felt like she already had answers to some things and was just steering around them instead of exploring them. At the time, I didn't connect anything to the fact I had left my phone there. It didn't cross my mind. There was no reason for it to. We stayed there for a while longer. The night kept moving, but it stopped feeling as open-ended as it had before. There was less discovery in what we were talking about. More like she was quietly mapping things in her head while I was still speaking normally. I remember watching people at other tables and thinking how everyone looked like they were in their own separate version of the night. Laughing, scrolling, waiting, eating. It all looked disconnected but normal. Then the moment came later when the noise had settled slightly and the pace of the night slowed down. It wasn't a dramatic reveal. There was no build-up, no hesitation. It just came out in a calm way that didn't match the casual setting at all. She mentioned she had gone through my phone while I was in the restroom. The words didn't land immediately. My brain kind of held them for a second before they made sense. Because it's one thing to imagine privacy being crossed in theory, and another to realize it happened in the exact time you were gone from your seat. She explained it in a way that sounded like she had already justified it to herself before saying it out loud. It wasn't presented as something chaotic or emotional. It was more like a method she had decided made sense for getting a clearer picture of someone. She said first impressions mattered more when they weren't filtered, and that the phone showed things people don't think about controlling in the moment. While she spoke, I kept thinking back to the exact position of my phone on the table. The distance between when I left it and when I came back suddenly felt different, like that small gap had been used for something I wasn't aware of. The strange part wasn't just the act itself, it was how composed everything around it still felt. The bar didn't change. The people around us didn't change. The night continued like nothing had shifted, but I couldn't notice it anymore. After that point, the conversation didn't recover its earlier flow. It still continued, but it felt segmented. I started noticing her reactions more than her words. She would respond in ways that suggested she already had context I hadn't given her directly. Not enough to confirm everything, but enough to make the interaction feel uneven. It created this odd sense of distance, even though we were sitting in the same place. Like there were two versions of the night happening at once. One where I was participating normally, and another where information about me had already been extracted and stored somewhere I couldn't see. At some point, I stopped focusing on what I was saying and started paying more attention to how things felt around me. The noise of the bar seemed less important. The table felt at a fixed point where something had already happened and couldn't be undone by continuing the conversation normally. We didn't argue or make a scene. The night didn't collapse. It just slowly lost shape. Eventually, it reached a point where staying longer didn't add anything. We left separately without making it into a moment. There wasn't a dramatic ending or final exchange that mattered. It just ended in motion, like two people leaving the same place for different reasons. Walking home, I kept replaying the moment I left my phone on the table. Not because it was a mistake, but because it had turned into a trigger point for something I didn't see coming. That small dab of time where I assumed nothing could happen had actually been enough for her to build a completely different layer of understanding about me. The streets were mostly empty, lights reflecting off wet pavement in places where it had rained earlier. I wasn't really thinking in a structured way, more like circling the same idea without landing on anything new. The part that stuck wasn't even anger or surprise. It was just the fact that the night had contained a hidden section I wasn't present for, even though I was sitting right there the whole time. By the time I got home, I didn't feel like anything needed to be resolved. It was just one of those situations that stayed in your head without asking for closure. The evening ended the same way it started, but the version I remembered it in wasn't identical to the version I actually lived through in the moment. I didn't even think much about Daniel at first, which is kind of funny now looking back at it, because he ended up being the type of person who doesn't really meet you directly. He builds you first and then shows up like he already knows the shape of you. The whole thing started on a regular afternoon that didn't feel like it was heading anywhere important. We met in a coffee shop that was always a bit too bright inside, but the lighting was trying too hard to make people feel awake. The kind of place where laptops stay open even when nobody is actually working and people sit for longer than they planned because leaving feels like effort. I remember choosing a seat near the window just because it felt less boxed in, not because I expected anything interesting to happen. Daniel arrived slightly later than planned. Not in a dramatic way, just enough to make it noticeable that he wasn't rushing anything in his life. He had that calm energy that doesn't immediately tell you anything about a person. At first, it just felt like I was meeting someone normal, someone you forget about the next day unless something happens to make them stick. The conversation started in a pretty standard way. Nothing deep, just background stuff. What I was doing, what he was doing, how the week had been. It didn't feel forced. It also didn't feel like there was anything unusual about it. I wasn't trying to impress him, and he didn't seem like he was trying to perform either. That's usually when things feel safest, when nobody is pushing the interaction in any direction. We sat there for a while, moving through topics in a pretty loose way. I remember noticing small details about the shop more than him at that point. The way people walked in and out, how some stayed only long enough to order and leave, how others acted like they had nowhere else to be. It was easy to zone out a bit while still talking. What I didn't notice at the time was how little he asked about things in a direct way. It felt like he wasn't digging into me at all, just gently steering the conversation around certain areas without ever really stopping on them. I didn't think anything of it. It just felt like a quiet personality. The shift didn't happen in the moment. It came later when I wasn't actively thinking about the interaction. A few days after meeting him, I started noticing small things that didn't line up with a normal first meeting. Not anything obvious, just slight inconsistencies in how he reacted to certain topics. Like he had already seen versions of me outside that conversation and was adjusting instead of discovering. At first, I ignored it. It's easy to overthink small social things if you're looking for patterns that aren't there, so I let it sit in the background. Then I found out what he had actually been doing. It didn't come from him directly at first. It came through a mutual connection mentioning something casual, almost offhand. That Daniel tends to look people up through older posts from people who knew them, not just social media, but scattered mentions across different places. Not in a simple searching way, more like building a web of references from people around the target instead of the target itself. That idea stuck with me longer than it should have, because it meant the version of me he was interacting with wasn't just based on that coffee shop conversation. It was layered on top of other people's memories, opinions, fragments I wasn't part of anymore. At first, I tried to downplay it. People look things up, that's normal. But the way it was described wasn't casual curiosity, it was structured. Like assembling a profile from indirect sources and using that as a foundation for real-time interaction. The more I thought about it, the more I started noticing how he spoke during that meeting. He wasn't reacting to me like someone forming opinions. He was reacting like someone confirming details. It made me replay the entire afternoon in my head, but in a different order. Not as a conversation, but as a comparison between what I said and what he already seemed to expect. There were moments where I said something, and he reacted with a level of certainty that didn't match the information just given. Not excitement or surprise, more like recognition. That feeling started to stand out more the longer I sat with it. The strangest part was how normal everything still looked on the surface. Nothing about the coffee shop meeting felt unusual than isolation. It only became strange when I started placing it next to what I learned afterwards. I remember walking back through it mentally at random points during the next few days. Not obsessively, just in fragments. The way he paused before certain responses. The way some topics were skipped over quickly while others were allowed to stretch a bit longer. It felt like he already had internal boundaries for what mattered. The idea that he had gathered information for people who knew me added a different weight to those memories. Because it meant I wasn't just interacting with one person, I was interacting with a filtered version of myself that had been constructed without my input. What made it more uncomfortable wasn't just the collecting of information, but the direction of it. It wasn't random curiosity. It had purpose. A kind of sorting process that turned scattered details into something that could be used to predict behavior. After that, I stopped seeing the coffee shop meeting as a first impression. It started feeling more like a checkpoint in a process that had already started before I even showed up. I didn't confront him about it. There wasn't really a moment that called for that. And part of me wasn't even sure what I would be asking. Because technically nothing he did during that meeting was directly wrong on its own. It only became unsettling when you connected the dots backwards. What stayed in my head wasn't anger. It was the realization that I had walked into a situation where the starting point wasn't actually the start. Every interaction after that felt slightly different for a while. Not because anything else happened with him, but because it changed how I thought about being known by someone. The idea that someone could build a version of you from outside sources before ever sitting across from you made normal conversation feel less clean. Eventually, I stopped going over it in detail. There wasn't a clean resolution or anything like that. It just became one of those things that sits in the background of how you interpret people for a while. The coffee shop itself is still there, same spot, same bright lighting. I passed it again later and it looked exactly the same as it did that day, which made the whole thing feel even more disconnected from the place itself. Daniel didn't really stay in my life after that. There wasn't a dramatic ending or final interaction that mattered. It just stopped naturally, like the thread had already been pulled in a different direction long before I noticed it. And that was it. I still remember thinking that night was going to be simple, like one of those evenings you forget before you even get home. Sophie had picked the place, some mid-range restaurant tucked between offices and small shops, the kind of area that feels empty after work hours, but still has people drifting through it like they have nowhere else to be. I got there a bit earlier than her and sat near the back, not because I planned it, just because it was the only table that didn't feel like it was directly in the middle of everything. The lighting was warm in a controlled way, not cozy, just engineered to look like it should feel cozy. There was soft background noise from other tables, nothing loud enough to stand out. When Sophie arrived, she looked relaxed in a way that didn't feel performative. Not overly dressed, not underdressed either. Just normal. That helped more than anything at the start. It makes you lower your guard when nothing about the person suggests effort beyond the situation. We started talking like people usually do in those settings, moving through simple topics, how the week had been, what we had been up to. Nothing heavy. I didn't feel like I had to steer anything, and she didn't seem like she was pushing for anything specific either. At first, it actually felt easy. The kind of conversation where silence doesn't feel like failure because it naturally fills itself again. I wasn't thinking much beyond the moment. But there was something slightly off that I didn't notice right away. It wasn't in what she said. It was more in how she reacted. A bit too steady, like she wasn't just responding, but also holding on to something else at the same time. We ordered food, waited, kept talking. The restaurant had that steady flow of clinking plates and low movement that makes everything feel slower than it is. I remember watching people around us without really focusing on them. Just background emotion. At some point during the meal, Sophie placed something on the table. It didn't look unusual at first. Just another object blending into everything else already there. I didn't think much of it, because people put things on tables all the time without it meaning anything. The conversation kept going. Nothing changed immediately. That's the thing about moments like this, they don't announce themselves. Everything stays normal while something underneath it shifts. I only started noticing something when her attention occasionally drifted in a way that didn't match the direction of the conversation. Not distracted exactly, more like she was collecting something from the space between us rather than just reacting to me. It still didn't click until later in the evening. The shift came when the night was already halfway through, when the food was mostly gone and the conversation had slowed into longer gaps. That's when she brought up that she liked being able to revisit moments after they happened. Not just remembering them, but replaying them to understand tone and detail better. At first, I didn't fully process what that meant. It sounded like one of those vague preferences people mention without much weight behind it. I didn't question it. But the way she said it didn't match the casual setting. It felt more structured, like it had been practiced in her head before being spoken. Later, after the bill was sorted and things were winding down, she mentioned it more directly. There had been something on the table the whole time, placed in a way that didn't draw attention, but had clearly been there from the start. It took a moment to register what it actually meant. She had placed a small recorder there at the beginning of the meal. Not hidden under anything, not disguised, just positioned like it belonged there. The idea was that the entire night had been captured without me treating it as something that needed awareness. The explanation wasn't emotional or defensive. It was calm in a way that made it harder to process. She said it helped her understand interactions better when she could listen back later and study how people actually spoke, not just what they said in the moment. That changed how I started replaying everything from the start of the evening. Because suddenly every part of the night had a second layer I hadn't been aware of. Every sentence, every pause, every small shift in tone wasn't just passing in real time anymore. It had been stored somewhere outside the moment. The weirdest part wasn't even the device itself. It was the fact that I hadn't noticed anything unusual about the table at all. I had treated the entire setting as shared space without thinking about what else might be happening inside it. After she mentioned it, I started noticing how carefully she had positioned herself throughout the night. Not in an obvious controlling way, but in small adjustments that made sense in hindsight. How she sometimes angled her attention slightly away while still being fully present. How certain pauses felt longer than they should have. At the time, I had just assumed it was natural rhythm in conversation. Now it felt like something else entirely. We finished the meal without making it a big moment. There wasn't an argument or confrontation. The restaurant stayed the same, people kept eating, glasses kept being cleared. Nothing around us reacted to what had just been revealed. That contrast made it worse in a quiet way, because everything outside the table still followed normal rules while my understanding of the table itself had changed completely. After leaving, I walked for a while without really deciding where I was going. The streets outside were colder than I expected, not weather-wise exactly, just that late evening emptiness that makes everything feel further apart than it should be. I kept thinking about how long that device had been there without me noticing. From the beginning of the night until the end, sitting in plain sight, collecting everything without interruption. It wasn't even about the content of what was recorded. It was the fact that I had assumed full awareness of the situation while actually missing a layer that was always active. That part stuck longer than anything else. Over the next few days, I kept replaying small fragments of the evening in my head. Not in detail, just flashes. The placement of the table object. The timing of certain pauses. The way nothing about the environment had ever signaled that something extra was happening. It made normal social situations feel slightly different for a while. Not in a paranoid way, just more aware that presence doesn't always equal full visibility of what's going on. Sophie didn't reach out after that night, and I didn't either. There wasn't really anything left in motion to continue. The interaction had already completed itself in a way that didn't need follow-up. The restaurant is still there too. I walked past it once not long after and it looked completely unchanged, like nothing significant had ever taken place inside it. Same lights, same tables, same quiet movement of people passing through. But for me, it stayed marked in a different way. Not as a place with a story, just as a reminder that the full shape of a moment isn't always contained in what you think you're actively part of while it's happening. And that night just ended there, without anything else attached to it. There's a certain type of person who treats a simple meeting like it's something that needs to be controlled from start to finish, and I didn't really know Matthew was that type until I was already sitting inside it. It didn't start off strange at all. In fact, it started in one of the most ordinary ways possible, which is probably why it took me longer to notice anything off. We met in a small city square cafe area that had a mix of outdoor seating and people constantly passing through. Nothing fancy, just a place where you can sit down without anyone asking too many questions. The weather was slightly warm, but not enough to be uncomfortable. Just that in-between state where people sit outside even if they don't need to. I got there first and picked a table near the edge of the seating area. Not really thinking about it, just choosing a spot where I could see what was going on around me. It felt normal enough. People were coming and going, ordering drinks, sitting for a bit, leaving again. Matthew arrived exactly on time, which I remember noticing but not questioning. There was no hesitation in how he approached the table. No scanning around, just direct movement like he already knew the exact point he was heading to. At first, he seemed structured but not unusual. Some people just have that slightly organized energy, where they don't waste words and don't drift around topics. The conversation started in a pretty standard way. Nothing deep, just basic introductions, what the week had been like, things like that. What stood out later wasn't the conversation itself, but how evenly everything seemed to move forward. There were no random shifts, no unexpected topics, no natural wandering. At the time, I thought it was just a focused personality type, someone who doesn't waste time. The place around us kept changing in small ways. Tables emptying, new people sitting down, chairs scraping against the ground, the usual flow of a public space. I remember noticing a couple sitting a few tables away who kept laughing at something on their phone, but I wasn't really paying attention to them. Matthew talked in a steady way, not rushed, not slow. Everything felt measured, but still normal enough that I didn't feel the need to question anything. Then at some point during the meeting, something small happened that I didn't register immediately. He mentioned that he liked knowing how things would unfold before they happened. It wasn't said in a dramatic way, more like a casual preference, the same way someone might mention liking a certain type of coffee. I didn't think much of it at the time. We ordered drinks and stayed seated. The interaction continued in a very predictable rhythm. That's the best way I can describe it now. Predictable in a way that didn't feel forced, just carefully aligned. It wasn't until later that I realized the structure of the entire meeting wasn't accidental. At one point, he reached into his bag and placed something down, not in a way that drew attention, just naturally like it belonged there. I didn't question it at the time because people put things on tables all the time. Phones, notebooks, keys, nothing unusual. The conversation continued while that object stayed there, unnoticed by me in any meaningful way. What I didn't realize then was that it wasn't just a casual meeting for him. It had a timeline. Not in a loose sense, but an actual structured breakdown of how the entire interaction was supposed to move forward. I only found out about it indirectly later when I heard him describe how he prefers to map out social situations in advance. Not just general planning, but detailed timing of interactions, down to how long each part of a meeting should last before moving to the next. At first, it sounded exaggerated, like something people say to sound more in control than they actually are. But when I replayed that day in my head, it started to match what I had experienced. There were no pauses that felt accidental. Even silence seemed placed with intention. If a topic ended, another one started almost immediately without the natural gap that usually exists when people are thinking. It made me realize I hadn't actually been moving through a normal conversation. I had been moving through a sequence. The cafe environment itself added to it without me noticing at first. People around us came and went in ways that almost aligned with the rhythm of our conversation, like background movement supporting the main structure. At one point, I remember thinking the timing of everything felt unusually smooth, but I dismissed it as coincidence. That's usually what you do when nothing explicitly wrong is happening. After the meeting ended, I walked away without thinking much of it. It didn't feel heavy or dramatic, just another interaction that finished normally. The realization came later, not all at once, but in pieces. First, it was the consistency of how he responded to everything. Then it was the lack of randomness in the conversation. Then it was the memory of how he had positioned the object on the table at the start and never interacted with it again. Then it clicked that the entire meeting had been running on a schedule I wasn't aware of. What made it unsettling wasn't just the planning itself, but how invisible it had been while it was happening. Nothing about the moment had felt forced or unnatural while I was inside it. It only started to look structured after I stepped out of it mentally. I started replaying small sections of the meeting, trying to find where the natural breaks were supposed to be. But the more I looked at it, the more it felt like there weren't any gaps left unaccounted for. Even my own responses seemed to have been placed into a flow that didn't interrupt his structure. It wasn't that I was controlled or anything like that. It was more like the environment had been shaped in a way where my reactions naturally fit into what he had already planned. After that, I couldn't really separate the meeting from its structure anymore. It stopped feeling like a casual interaction and started feeling like a controlled sequence of moments that just happened to include me. I didn't reach out to him afterward. There wasn't any confrontation or follow-up. It just ended like normal interactions end, but with a different understanding attached to it. The cafe itself is still there, same setup, same tables outside, people still sitting in the same general pattern. I passed by it again later, and it looked completely unchanged, which made the whole thing feel even more disconnected from the place itself. It wasn't the location that mattered. It was the way time had been organized inside it without me noticing. And that was pretty much it. The meeting didn't continue beyond that point, and neither did anything related to it. I knew something was off before I'd even sat down, that I couldn't explain why at the time. It wasn't anything obvious like someone staring or following me, just that quiet feeling you get when a place looks normal but doesn't feel fully yours. I almost ignored it, because you don't want to start a night already overthinking things, but it stayed there in the background. The restaurant Flo picked was one of those semi-busy places right in the middle of a shopping street, where there's always movement outside and just enough noise inside to make conversations feel slightly contained. Big front windows, rows of tables close enough that you can hear other people if you try, but far enough that you're supposed to feel like you have your own space. I got there a bit early and stood outside for a second before going in, watching people pass by like I was deciding whether I even wanted to be there. Nothing stood out. Couples, groups, random people walking past like any other evening, so I went in. Chloe was already inside, sitting at a table slightly off to the side. Not hidden, but not central either. It looked like a normal choice. She waved when she saw me, and everything about her seemed relaxed. Not overly focused, not distracted, just present in a way that made the start feel easy. I sat down, and the usual first few minutes played out exactly how you'd expect. Basic conversation, nothing too deep, just figuring out each other's pace. The environment helped with that. Plates moving, glasses being set down, people laughing at other tables. It all blended together in a way that made everything feel low pressure. At first, nothing about the situation stood out as unusual. Chloe talked in a way that felt natural, not rehearsed, not too careful. I didn't feel like I was being evaluated or pushed into anything. It felt like a normal night. But that earlier feeling didn't fully go away. It wasn't coming from Chloe directly. It was more tied to the space around us. Like the table wasn't as isolated as it looked, even though nothing physically suggested that. I noticed a group sitting a few tables behind us at one point. Not because they were loud or doing anything obvious, but because they seemed slightly more aware of our table than people usually are of strangers. I didn't think much of it at the time. People glance around, that's normal. We ordered food and kept talking. The conversation stayed steady, nothing dramatic. It had that comfortable rhythm where you don't feel the need to fill every second. Flo seemed engaged, but not intense, which made it easier to stay relaxed. Every now and then, though, I caught small things that didn't quite line up. Like she would briefly glance past me, not in a distracted way, but like she was checking something in the background. It wasn't frequent enough to be obvious, just enough to register subconsciously. I brushed it off. There's always something slightly off if you look hard enough. The night moved forward, food arrived, plates shifted. Time passed in that slow restaurant way where you don't really notice how long you've been sitting there. Then somewhere in the middle of the meal, the tone shifted slightly. Not dramatically, just enough that the conversation felt less spontaneous and more directed. Chloe started asking questions that weren't random anymore. They were more pointed, like she was filling in gaps instead of just talking. That's when I started paying more attention. Not in a paranoid way, just more aware of what was happening around me instead of only focusing on the conversation. I noticed the group behind us again. They weren't talking much among themselves anymore, at least not in a way that matched how groups usually behave in restaurants. Still, nothing directly connected those observations to anything concrete. Until she said it. It came out casually, like it was something that didn't need build-up. Somewhere between topics, she mentioned that she liked getting second opinions when meeting someone new. Not in a joking way, but not serious enough at first to trigger a reaction. I didn't immediately understand what she meant. Then she clarified. She had invited a few friends to sit nearby and observe me during the date. Not openly, not as part of the interaction, but as quiet observers. People who could watch how I acted without me knowing and give their perspective afterward. The moment she said it, everything I had been ignoring clicked into place. The group behind us. The occasional glances. The feeling that the table wasn't fully private. It all connected in a way that made the entire night shift instantly. I didn't react right away. It took a second for the meaning to settle properly, because it changes the entire structure of what you thought was happening. It wasn't just a conversation between two people anymore. It was something being watched, assessed, interpreted by others without my awareness. Chloe didn't seem nervous about admitting it. If anything, she seemed calm, like it was a normal extension of how she approached meeting people. She explained it like it added clarity, like it helped her see things she might miss on her own. While she was explaining it, I became hyper-aware of everything around us. The positioning of tables, the angle of the chairs, the distance between us, and the group behind. It all felt different now, like the layout had been part of something instead of just random seating. I didn't turn around to look at them directly. I didn't need to. Knowing they were there was enough to change how the entire space felt. After that, the conversation didn't recover its earlier rhythm. It kept going, but it wasn't the same. Every word felt slightly more exposed, like it wasn't just landing between us anymore. Even though nothing physically changed, the awareness of being observed stayed there. The restaurant noise didn't disappear, but it stopped blending in. It became something separate, like a layer over the situation instead of part of it. I started noticing how long we had been sitting there, how many times people had walked past, how many small moments had already happened under observation without me knowing. We finished the meal without making a scene. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, nothing dramatic. The night just lost its shape. When we got up to leave, I didn't look toward the group behind us. I didn't want to confirm anything visually. It was enough to know. Outside, the street felt louder than before, even though it hadn't changed. People still moving, shops still lit, everything continuing like normal. But the idea that part of the night had been shared with people I wasn't interacting with stayed in my head. I walked for a while before heading home, not really thinking in a straight line, just going over small fragments of the evening. The way the table had felt slightly off from the beginning, the glances I ignored, the moment everything connected. By the time I got home, it didn't feel like something that needed resolution. It just felt like a night that had a hidden layer I hadn't agreed to be part of. Flo didn't reach out after that, and I didn't either. It ended without needing to be ended. The restaurant is still there. Same layout, same tables, same noise. I passed it again later and it looked exactly the same, which made the whole thing feel even more detached from the place itself. I didn't realize I was being timed until way later, which is probably the worst part about the whole thing. If someone tells you up front they're going to test your patience, at least you know what you're dealing with. This wasn't like that. This felt like a normal plan that slowly turned into something else without warning. The plan itself was simple. Meet Joshua outside a small food place that stayed open late, the kind where people grab something quick and either sit inside for a bit or just take it and walk. Nothing formal, nothing that needed effort. That's why I had agreed to it in the first place. It felt low pressure. I got there on time. Not early, not late, just exactly when we said. The street was active in that evening way where it's not crowded but never empty either. Cars passing, people walking in different directions, some stopping, some just moving through. At first, I didn't think anything of it when he wasn't there yet. People run a few minutes behind all the time. I leaned against the wall near the entrance and checked my phone casually, not worried. 5 minutes passed, still nothing. I told myself it was normal. 10 minutes isn't a big deal. I watched people going in and out of the place, noticing random details just to pass time. A guy dropping his drink and laughing it off, a couple arguing quietly near the door, small things that don't matter. 15 minutes in, I started to feel it slightly. Not frustration exactly, just that awareness that I was waiting without knowing how long it would last. I checked my phone again. No message. That part stood out more than the waiting itself. By 20 minutes, it started to feel intentional. Not in a confirmed way, Just that quiet shift where you stop assuming something is delayed and start wondering if there's a reason behind it. I looked around more carefully, scanning faces without trying to make it obvious. Nothing stood out. I considered leaving for a second. Not seriously, just testing the idea in my head, but I stayed. Mostly because I wanted to see how it played out. There's a point where curiosity keeps you in the situation longer than you should be. People kept moving around me like nothing unusual was happening. That's the weird thing about waiting in public. Your situation feels specific, but the environment doesn't acknowledge it at all. Everything continues at the same pace whether you stay or go. 30 minutes passed. At that point, it stopped feeling like a delay and started feeling like a decision I was making to remain there. That's when it shifted from passive waiting to active choice. I stayed anyway. I started paying more attention to how I was acting. How often I checked my phone, how I stood, whether I looked like I was waiting or just standing there. It's strange how quickly you become aware of yourself when you think you might be observed. That thought came and went quickly. I didn't take it seriously. 40 minutes in, I felt slightly disconnected from the original plan. It didn't feel like I was waiting for someone anymore. It felt like I was in a situation that had changed meaning without telling me. I stepped away from the wall and walked a short distance down the street, then came back. Not because I needed to, just to break the feeling of being stuck in one spot. The movement helped a bit, but it didn't change the underlying question of why I was still there. Then finally he showed up. No rush, no visible stress, just walking toward me like the timing matched his expectation perfectly. That alone made everything feel off, because it didn't match mine at all. At first, he didn't acknowledge the delay in a meaningful way. Just a brief mention, nothing detailed, like the time gap didn't need explanation. We went inside and ordered food like nothing had happened. The interaction started normally, but I couldn't ignore the weight of the waiting anymore. It sat there in the background of everything we said. After a bit, he brought it up directly. He said he wanted to see how long I would wait and what I would do during that time. Not as a joke, not as something light, but as a deliberate choice he had made before arriving. The moment he said it, the entire previous hour changed shape. It wasn't just waiting anymore. It had been a test. Every minute I stood there, every decision to stay or leave, every small action I took while passing time had been part of something I didn't agree to. I didn't react immediately. It took a second for the idea to settle properly, because it means the interaction didn't start when he arrived. It started the moment I showed up. He explained it like it gave him insight into how I handle uncertainty, patience, and unstructured time. Like those 40 minutes told him more than the actual conversation would. While he was explaining it, I started replaying that entire wait in my head. The 5-minute mark where I wasn't concerned. The 10-minute mark where I stayed relaxed. The 20-minute mark where I started questioning it. The moment I considered leaving, the decision to stay anyway. All of it had been observed in some way, even if I didn't see how. That part stuck more than anything. Not just that I had been tested, but that the test had started before I even knew there was one. The rest of the time we spent there didn't feel the same. The food arrived, we ate, we talked, but it all felt secondary to what had already happened outside. The main part of the interaction had already been completed before we even sat down. I found myself paying less attention to what he was saying and more to how the situation had been structured without my awareness. The place itself stayed the same. People eating, staff moving around, nothing changing in the environment. But the meaning of being there felt completely different. After we finished, we left without making it into a big moment. No argument, no clear ending, just a quiet separation of direction. Walking away, I kept thinking about that initial moment when I arrived and everything felt normal. How quickly that shifted without me noticing. The street looked the same as it had earlier. Same lights, same movement, same flow of people. But I couldn't see it the same way anymore. Because now I knew that for almost an hour, I had been part of something structured around me without my knowledge. Joshua didn't message after that, and I didn't either. It didn't feel like something that needed continuation. The whole thing ended exactly where it began, on that same street, just with a completely different understanding attached to it. I noticed it in the smallest way possible, which is probably why it bothered me more later. Not something dramatic, not some big reveal, just a tiny repeat that didn't feel like a mistake. At the time, I brushed it off. People forget things, people ask again, it happens. But that wasn't what this was. I met Lucy in a quiet park cafe that sat right between a walking path and a row of trees that blocked out most of the city noise. It was one of those places where everything feels slightly slowed down. People walking dogs, a few joggers passing through, others just sitting on benches doing nothing in particular. I got there early and sat outside. The air felt clean in that fake city way where it's not actually clean, just less polluted than usual. I remember watching a guy try to get his dog to sit still while tying his shoe and thinking that was more interesting than anything I expected from the evening. Lucy showed up right on time, not rushed, not late. She had this calm way of moving like she wasn't reacting to anything around her, just following her own pace. It made the start feel easy. No awkward energy, no forced politeness. We sat down and started talking like normal. The conversation didn't feel stiff or planned. It moved naturally from one topic to another, small things at first. What we've been doing lately, random thoughts about the area, nothing heavy. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual about how she spoke or listened. She seemed engaged, not overly intense, just present. That's usually a good sign. It makes you drop your guard a bit without realizing it. We ordered drinks and stayed outside. The park setting made everything feel more open than a normal cafe. People passing by, birds moving around, the occasional sound of someone laughing in the distance. It all blended into the background. Then it happened the first time. She asked me something I had already answered. It wasn't obvious at first. The question was phrased slightly differently, like it was coming from a different angle. So I answered it again without thinking much about it. That's normal. Conversations overlap sometimes. But the way she reacted to my answer felt slightly too focused. Not surprised, not curious, just attentive in a way that felt like she was comparing something rather than learning it for the first time. I didn't dwell on it. It was easy to ignore. We kept talking. The conversation moved forward, new topics, different directions. It still felt normal overall. Nothing big stood out. Then it happened again. Another question that circled back to something I had already said earlier, but phrased differently. Not identical, just close enough that it felt familiar. I answered again, but this time I noticed it more clearly. I started to feel like the conversation wasn't just moving forward. It was looping. Still, I didn't say anything. I wanted to see if it would happen again or if it was just coincidence. The third time made it obvious. She asked about something I had mentioned near the start, but in a way that stripped out the context I had originally given. It was like she wanted the answer again without the framing, just the raw version. That's when I started paying attention. Not just to the questions, but to how she reacted after I answered them. There was a pattern. She wasn't just listening. She was checking something. The rest of the environment stayed the same. People walking by, drinks being served, nothing changing around us, but my focus shifted completely. I started remembering exactly what I had said earlier so I could compare it to what I was saying now. Not because I was trying to be consistent, but because I wanted to see what she was doing. She didn't rush it. The repeated questions were spaced out enough that they didn't feel obvious if you weren't paying attention. That's what made it more deliberate. At one point, I gave a slightly different version of an answer on purpose. Nothing major, just a small change in wording and emphasis. I wanted to see how she would react. She noticed. Not in a dramatic way, but there was a pause. A slight shift in her expression, like something didn't line up with what she expected. She didn't call it out immediately, but the moment stayed there. That's when I knew it wasn't accidental. Later in the conversation, she brought it up. Not aggressively, not accusingly, just calmly. She mentioned that she liked to see if people stayed consistent when asked the same thing in different ways. She said it helped her understand whether someone was being genuine or just saying what sounded right in the moment. Hearing it directly changed everything, because it meant the conversation wasn't just a conversation. It was structured around testing consistency. Every repeated question had a purpose I wasn't aware of when answering it the first time. I started replaying the earlier parts of the conversation in my head. The first repeat I didn't notice. The second one I ignored. The third one I tested. All of it connected now. What made it strange wasn't just the method, but how invisible it had been at the start. If I hadn't caught on, it would have just continued without me realizing what was happening. After that, the conversation didn't feel the same. It kept going, but every question carried a different weight. I couldn't answer casually anymore because I knew there was a layer of evaluation behind it. Even simple topics felt like they were being measured. The park around us didn't change. People still walking, dogs still moving, everything continuing like normal. But the sense of openness I felt at the beginning disappeared. I became more aware of my own words than the actual topics. Not because I was trying to pass some test, but because I knew one was happening. Lucy stayed calm the whole time. She didn't act like anything unusual was going on. For her, this was just part of how she interacted with people. That contrast made it more noticeable. We eventually finished our drinks and stood up to leave. There was no dramatic ending, no confrontation. The interaction just slowed down and ended like a normal meeting would on the surface. But it didn't feel normal anymore. Walking away from the park, I kept thinking about how easy it is to answer questions without realizing they're being repeated. How natural it feels to respond without tracking your own consistency. The idea that someone could build a picture of you just by looping the same topics in slightly different ways stayed with me. It wasn't even about whether I had been consistent or not. It was about the structure behind the conversation that I hadn't seen at first. Lucy didn't reach out after that, and I didn't either. It ended quietly, without needing anything else added to it. The park cafe is still there. Same tables, same path, same steady flow of people moving through it. I walked past it again a while later, and it looked exactly the same. Calm, open, normal. But I didn't sit there again after that. I should have paid more attention to the way he picked the place, but at the time it just felt like a normal suggestion. Everyone picks somewhere, right? It doesn't usually mean anything deeper than convenience or preference. That's what I thought walking into it. Andrew chose this restaurant tucked away on a side street that didn't get much foot traffic. You wouldn't just pass it randomly. You had to be looking for it, or at least know it was there. That alone made it feel slightly intentional, but not in a way that raised any alarms. I got there just as the sky was starting to darken, that in-between time where the streetlights come on, but there's still enough natural light to see everything clearly. The place had large windows facing the street, but inside it felt more enclosed than it looked from outside. Andrew was already there, sitting at a table near the back. Not the most hidden spot, but not one you'd choose if you wanted to be easily seen either. I didn't think much of it at first. People pick random seats all the time. When I sat down, everything felt normal. The usual start. Basic conversation, nothing deep, just setting the tone. He seemed relaxed, not nervous, not overly confident, just steady. We ordered food and started talking. The restaurant wasn't crowded, which made everything quieter than expected. You could hear small details more clearly. Plates being set down, low conversations from other tables, the occasional sound of the door opening and closing. At first, the conversation flowed without anything standing out. It didn't feel forced, and it didn't feel particularly meaningful either. Just a normal interaction. But there was something about the way Andrew looked around the space every now and then. Not in a distracted way, more like he was aware of the environment in a deeper sense. Like the place itself mattered to him beyond just being a location. I noticed it, but I didn't connect it to anything. We kept talking. Topics came and went. Nothing unusual on the surface. But every so often, he would glance at certain parts of the restaurant, like specific tables or corners, almost like he was referencing something in his head. It started to feel like he wasn't just present in the current moment, like he was comparing it to something else. Still, I didn't ask about it. It didn't feel like something worth interrupting the flow over. The night continued like that for a while. Food arrived, we ate, conversation moved in small waves. The environment stayed consistent, quiet, contained, slightly removed from everything outside. Then at some point he mentioned it. Not in a dramatic way, just casually, like it was part of the context that didn't need build-up. He said he liked coming to this place because it had been the setting for several previous dates that hadn't worked out. At first, it sounded like a random detail. People revisit places all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. But then he added more. He explained that he chose this specific restaurant because he wanted to compare how different people behaved in the exact same setting. Same layout, same conditions, same general timing. He saw it as a way to measure compatibility more clearly. That's when it shifted. Because it meant I wasn't just sitting in a random restaurant. I was sitting in a controlled environment he had used before for the same purpose. The table we were at, the positioning, the time of day, none of it was random. It was part of a repeated setup. I started looking around the place differently after that. The other tables didn't feel like just background anymore. They felt like reference points. Like this entire space had been used multiple times as a stage for similar interactions, and I had just stepped into the latest version of it. Andrew talked about it calmly, like it made perfect sense. He said it helped him notice patterns, how people reacted to the same environment, how conversations unfolded under similar conditions. While he was explaining it, I kept thinking about the fact that other people had sat in the same spot, had similar conversations, gone through the same sequence of events without me knowing. It made the entire setting feel less personal. Like the night wasn't unique, it was part of a series. I started replaying small details of the evening with that in mind. The way he chose the table quickly without hesitation. The way he seemed familiar with the timing of things. The way he occasionally looked around like he was checking alignment. All of it started to make more sense. The conversation continued, but it felt different now. Less like a one-time interaction and more like a repeated experiment. I found myself wondering how many times he had done this. How many people had sat across from him in the same spot, talking about similar things, unaware of the context behind it. The restaurant itself didn't change. The staff moved the same way, the lighting stayed consistent, the quiet atmosphere remained. But the meaning of being there shifted completely. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a reference point in a pattern I had just been added to. At some point, I noticed how predictable parts of the evening felt. Not because I knew what would happen, but because it seemed like he did. Like he had seen enough variations to anticipate general outcomes. That made it harder to stay fully present. Instead of just talking, I was thinking about the structure behind the situation. How much of it was genuine and how much of it was part of his comparison process. We finished the meal without making it into a big moment. No confrontation, no argument. Just a gradual slowdown until it felt natural to leave. Walking out of the restaurant, the street felt more open than before. The quiet of the place stayed behind, but the idea of it didn't. I kept thinking about how easily a setting can feel personal while actually being reused in ways you're not aware of. The next time I passed that street, I noticed the restaurant again. Same windows, same layout, nothing visibly different. But I couldn't look at it the same way. Because now it wasn't just a place. It was part of a pattern someone else had been running long before I walked into it. Andrew didn't reach out after that, and I didn't either. It ended quietly like the rest of the night. The weirdest part was that Aaron didn't say it like it was weird. He said it while cutting into his burger, like he was telling me he had checked the weather or looked at the menu before getting there. I almost laughed because I thought I had heard him wrong, but then he kept going, and my stomach just kind of dropped. I met Aaron on an app after talking for about 2 weeks. He seemed normal enough. Not boring, not trying too hard, not sending paragraphs at 2 in the morning. He had a job fixing air conditioning units, liked hiking, had a dog named Milo, and seemed like the kind of guy my friends would tell me to give a chance because he seemed stable. We met at this small burger place near the edge of town, not super fancy, but busy enough that I felt fine going there alone. I got there early because I hate walking in while someone is already sitting there watching the door. He showed up about 5 minutes after me, smiled, hugged me, and seemed pretty relaxed. At first, it was honestly decent. He asked normal questions. Work, school, family, music, that kind of thing. He didn't stare too much. He didn't talk only about himself. I actually remember thinking I might have finally had a normal first date. Then he started talking about my neighborhood. Not in a random way either. He mentioned the gas station near my street, then the little park behind it, then the road that cuts behind my house. I asked how he knew that area, thinking maybe he had a friend nearby. That's when he said he had driven past my house a few times before we met, just to get familiar with my routine. I felt my fork stop halfway in my mouth. He kept eating like nothing happened. He said he didn't mean anything bad by it. He said dating was risky and people lie online, so he liked to make sure someone was real. He said he had seen my car in the driveway twice and noticed I usually left around the same time in the morning. He said it was actually kind of cute how predictable I was. Cute. That word made it worse. I tried to keep my face normal because the place was crowded and I didn't want them to make a scene. I just nodded slowly and asked him how he knew where I lived. He said I had posted a picture of my front porch months ago, and the street sign was blurry but still clear enough if you zoomed in. Then he checked around online and matched it to some public address thing. He said it like he was proud of himself, like he had solved a puzzle. I suddenly remembered the photo. It was from when I had painted a little table outside. I never thought anything of it. I didn't think anyone would care enough to zoom in. Aaron cared enough. The date changed after that. The whole room felt louder, but also really far away. I remember hearing a kid laughing at the next table and some machine beeping behind the counter. I remember watching Aaron dip a fry into ketchup and wondering how many times he had been outside my house while I was inside, probably wearing sweatpants, probably watching TV, probably thinking I was alone. He started asking me if I usually parked on the left side of the driveway or if someone else used that spot. I said it depended. That was a lie. It didn't depend. It was always my spot. He nodded like he had already known that. I stopped eating after that. I said I was full, even though I had barely touched my food. He asked if I wanted dessert. I said no. He asked if I wanted to walk around after. I said I had to get home because I had an early morning. He smiled and said he knew. That was the moment I decided I was not letting him walk me to my car. I texted my friend under the table and told her to call me. She did about 2 minutes later. I acted like something had come up, grabbed my jacket, and stood up. Aaron stood too, way too quickly, like he had been waiting for me to move. He said he would walk me out. I said I was fine. He said the parking lot was dark. I said I could see my car from the door. He followed anyway, not close enough to grab me or anything, but close enough that I could hear his shoes behind me. I didn't look back. I walked straight to my car, unlocked it only when I was beside it, got in fast, and locked the doors. He stood by the front of the restaurant and lifted one hand like we were ending a cute little date. I drove away without waiting back. I didn't go home right away. I drove to a grocery store parking lot and sat there for almost 20 minutes. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I kept checking my mirrors even though I hadn't seen his truck behind me. I called my friend and told her everything. She wanted me to come sleep at her apartment, so I did. On the way there, I took random turns like I was in some spy movie, which sounds dramatic, but at that point I didn't care. The next morning, I blocked Aaron everywhere. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Around noon, I got a message from a random account. No photo, no posts. Just my name and a question asking why I had blocked him. I blocked that too. Then another account messaged me that evening. This one said I was overreacting and that he had only been trying to be careful. It said women always wanted men to be serious until men actually put effort in. I blocked it. For the next few days, I stayed at my friend's place. My parents thought I was being dramatic at first until I told them the part about him knowing my morning routine. My dad drove around our street a couple times and told the neighbors to keep an eye out for Aaron's truck. I hated that. I hated that my life suddenly had this extra layer of checking and watching. 3 days later, my neighbor across the street texted my mom and said a truck had slowed down outside our house. She sent a blurry photo from her kitchen window. It was Aaron's truck. Same dent on the front bumper, same faded sticker on the back window. That was enough. My dad called the police non-emergency line. They couldn't do much at first because Aaron hadn't threatened me directly, but they took a report. I saved every message. I saved the photo. I changed my routines. I stopped parking in the driveway for a while. I made all my socials private and removed old posts with anything showing the outside of my house. A week after the date, Aaron sent one last message from another new account. It was long and messy. He said he thought we had a real connection. He said I embarrassed him by leaving like that. He said he wasn't dangerous and that the real problem was that I had trust issues. I didn't answer. That night, I finally went home. I remember standing in my room and looking out the window at the street. Every car sounded like it was slowing down. Every headlight felt like it was aimed at my house. I hated that he had taken a normal place and made it feel watched. A few days later, I saw him in town. I was at a pharmacy picking up shampoo, and he walked in near the front. I don't know if he saw me first or if I saw him first, but my whole body went stiff. He looked surprised, then annoyed, like I had done something wrong by existing in the same store. I left my basket in the aisle and went straight to the cashier area where there were people. He didn't follow me all the way, but he stood at the end of the aisle pretending to look at toothpaste. I called my dad from inside the store. Aaron left before my dad got there. After that, the police report mattered more. My dad updated it. My neighbor kept the photo. My friend made me promise not to answer any message from him ever, even if it seemed harmless. For about a month, things felt tense. I didn't go places alone at night. I parked differently. I stopped posting in real time. I hated how much space he took up in my head after one dinner. Then it slowed down. No more messages. No more fake accounts. No truck outside. Nothing. I still think about how calm he was when he told me. That's what bothered me most. Not even the fact that he found my house, though that was bad enough. It was how normal he thought it was to turn a first date into some kind of investigation. Like I was a place to study before visiting. Like my life was something he could quietly watch from the road. The last thing I did was delete the porch photo. I stared at it for a while before deleting it, annoyed at myself even though I knew it wasn't my fault. It was just a table. Just paint. Just a normal post. I should have known something was off when she hugged me like we had already been dating for months. It was our first time meeting in person. We had only been texting for maybe a week and a half. So it seemed cool at first. She was funny in a chaotic way, always sending voice notes instead of typing, always talking about how tired she was from work, but still somehow going out every night. She worked at a salon downtown and said she loved meeting new people. I figured she was just social. We decided to grab dinner at this small Italian place near the river. It was one of those spots with string lights hanging outside and too many fake plants inside, the kind of place that tries to feel romantic without trying too hard. I got there first. I always do. I hate being the one walking in and scanning the room. I sat near the window and watched people walking dogs along the sidewalk while pretending to look at the menu. Zoe walked in wearing this bright red jacket that made her impossible to miss. She spotted me immediately, waved both arms in the air, and came over smiling like she had just won something. The hug lasted too long. Not creepy long, just familiar long. We sat down and she started talking right away. Not in a bad way, just fast. About her coworkers, her younger sister, how her mom kept asking why she was still single, how she was tired of situationships and wanted something real. I nodded along. That all felt normal enough. A lot of people say that on first dates. I even agreed with her about the situationship thing. Dinner was actually going fine. She laughed at my stupid story about getting locked out of my car last month. She told me about a client who fell asleep in her chair and started snoring mid-haircut. It felt easy. Then halfway through the main course, she set her fork down, looked at me with this serious expression, and said she had something to tell me. I braced myself for something dramatic, like a secret boyfriend or a job offer in another country. Instead, she told me she had already told her family about me. I smiled at first because I thought she had mentioned she was going on a date. No. She meant she had told them we were in a serious relationship. She had shown them my photos. She had told them my name, where I worked, what I studied. She said her mom cried because she was so happy Zoe had finally found someone stable. She said her dad wanted to meet me. Then she said they were having a barbecue that weekend and she had told them I would be there. I think I actually stopped breathing for a second. I asked her how she described me. She said she told them I was thoughtful and mature, and that I was exactly the kind of guy she had been praying for. Praying for. We had been on one date for maybe 45 minutes at that point. She kept talking, explaining how important family was to her. How she didn't believe in wasting time. How when she felt something good, she leaned into it fully. She said she didn't want to play games. I tried to keep my face calm, but inside my head everything was flashing red. It wasn't just that she had told them about me. It was that she had decided what we were without asking me. She asked if Saturday afternoon worked better than Sunday. I said I wasn't sure yet. She frowned a little like that answer confused her. She said she had already promised I would come. The rest of dinner felt heavy. Every time I tried to steer the conversation back to something casual, she looped it back to us. She started asking questions about how many kids I wanted someday. She asked where I saw myself in 5 years. She asked if I would ever move closer to her side of town. I felt like I had accidentally walked into a final interview instead of a first date. When the check came, she reached for it and said she could pay since technically she had invited me to the family thing too. I insisted on splitting it. I didn't want to feel like I owed her anything. Outside, the air felt colder than before. She stood close to me on the sidewalk and said she was really glad she didn't cancel tonight because she had almost gotten nervous earlier. I asked why. She said she just didn't want to scare me off. That sentence stuck in my head. On the drive home, she texted me before I even made it to the highway. She said her mom was already asking what kind of food I liked so they could prepare. I didn't answer right away. When I got home, I sat on my bed and stared at my phone. My friends were in our group chat talking about some game night plan, and I almost told them everything right then. Instead, I called my older brother. He laughed at first. Then when I told him she had told her parents we were serious, he stopped laughing. He said that wasn't normal. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from Zoe and 5 texts. Nothing angry, just excited. She had already picked out what she was going to wear to introduce me to everyone. She said her aunt was flying in and it felt like perfect timing. Flying in. I hadn't even agreed. I finally replied and told her I thought things were moving too fast. I said I liked meeting her, but I wasn't ready to meet her entire family after one date. Her typing bubble popped up immediately. She said she understood, but then she said sometimes you have to take risks. She said her family would think it was weird if I suddenly couldn't make it. She asked me what she was supposed to tell them. That made my stomach twist. It felt like she was more worried about how it looked than about how I felt. I told her to just say I had a work thing. She said that would make me look flaky. That's when I realized this wasn't about me at all. It was about the version of me she had already created in her head. Over the next 2 days, she kept sending messages about the barbecue. Photos of her backyard, a picture of the grill, a screenshot of her sister asking if I was tall. I didn't respond much. Friday night, she called again. I let it ring. Then she texted asking if I was getting cold feet. She said she didn't want to waste time on someone who wasn't serious. I typed out a long message explaining that I barely knew her and that meeting her family felt like skipping 5 chapters ahead. I deleted it. Instead, I just told her I wasn't coming and that I thought it was better if we didn't continue seeing each other. She didn't answer for almost an hour. Then she sent one message that said I had embarrassed her in front of her entire family and that I clearly wasn't the man she thought I was. That line almost made me laugh because that was exactly the problem. She had thought I was something. I wasn't. Saturday afternoon, I went to the gym just to stay busy. I kept wondering if she was telling everyone some story about how I had an emergency. I wondered if her mom was still flipping burgers while asking where I was. Later that night, she posted a photo on social media. It was a family picture in the backyard. The caption said something about trusting timing and not settling. I felt weirdly relieved. A week later, she tried texting again. She said maybe we had just gotten off on the wrong foot. She said she moved fast because she had been hurt before and didn't want to waste time. I didn't respond. The last thing she sent was a long paragraph about how she had already pictured us spending holidays together. That was it for me. I had matched her, blocked her number, and tried to forget how intense that dinner had felt. Sometimes I still think about how confident she was that I would just slide into the role she had planned, like I was an actor who had missed his cue. It was one date, just pasta and small talk and a hug that lasted too long. But somehow in her mind, it had already turned into meeting the parents and planning holidays. I knew something was off when he said he remembered a photo I deleted 3 years ago. Not remembered like it was still up. Remembered like he had it saved somewhere. I met Connor at a late-night coffee shop that stays open until midnight because it's near the college campus. It was raining that night, the kind of steady rain that makes the sidewalks shine and the air feel heavier. I almost canceled because I was tired, but we had been talking for about a month, and he seemed genuinely interesting. He was studying architecture, always sending me pictures of weird buildings and rating them. He seemed thoughtful, calm, slightly nerdy in a way I didn't mind. When I walked in, he was already sitting at a table in the corner with 2 drinks. He had guessed my order correctly based on something I had mentioned once. That felt sweet at the time. Attentive, I guess. We started talking about random stuff. School stress, his internship, my job. It felt normal. He didn't interrupt. He didn't stare too hard. He laughed at the right moments. I remember thinking I might actually like him. About 40 minutes in, he said he had something funny to show me. I assumed it was a meme or some building design he hated. Instead, he opened a folder on his phone. Not his camera roll, a specific folder. He turned the screen toward me and started scrolling. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. It was screenshots of social media posts. My posts. Old ones. From years back. Photos I barely remembered posting. Random captions. Comments from friends I don't even talk to anymore. He scrolled slowly, almost proudly. There were screenshots from my old profile picture phases. A photo of me at the beach from when I was 19. A stupid gym mirror selfie I deleted because it felt cringe later. Even a blurry picture of my dog that I had posted and removed the same week. I felt heat rush to my face. I asked why he had those. He said he liked to do research. Research. He said when he finds someone interesting, he likes to understand their timeline. He said it helps him see patterns. Growth. Changes in personality. I tried to laugh it off at first, but he kept scrolling. There were screenshots of captions where I had vented about a bad day. Screenshots of arguments in comment sections. Even screenshots of posts where I had tagged locations. He had organized them by year. By year. I asked him how long it took to gather all that. He said not that long. He had started after our first week of texting because he had a good feeling about me. A good feeling. He zoomed in on one screenshot of me holding a guitar at a friend's house party. He said he liked that version of me. Said I seemed more carefree back then. I don't even play guitar. It was someone else's. I suddenly felt like I was sitting across from someone who had built a whole documentary about me without me knowing. The cafe felt smaller. The rain outside felt louder. I could hear the milk steamer hissing behind the counter, and it made everything feel sharper. He kept talking about how fascinating it was to see how my captions shifted over time. How I used to use more emojis. How I seemed more optimistic before a certain year. I asked if he had screenshots of everyone he dated. He said no, just the ones he felt serious about. That didn't make it better. I asked what he planned to do with them. He said nothing bad. He just liked having them. He said people delete parts of themselves online, and he liked preserving things. Preserving. That word stuck with me. It felt like I wasn't a person sitting there. I was a project. He even had screenshots of comments I had left on other people's posts. Random jokes. Inside references. He had them saved like they were important files. I tried to keep my voice steady and asked if he ever thought it was invasive. He said everything was public at some point. That answer made my chest tighten. Just because something was public doesn't mean someone should build an archive of it. He noticed I got quiet and asked if I was uncomfortable. I said a little. He looked confused, like he genuinely didn't understand why. He said he thought I would find it flattering, that it showed how invested he was. Invested. I finished my drink too fast, just had something to do with my hands. My mind kept racing through all the random posts I had made over the years. All the versions of myself I had grown out of. He had them frozen in screenshots. He started swiping again and stopped on one photo I had deleted after a breakup. It was just a picture of a sunset with a vague caption. He said he remembered that phase. He said I seemed sad. I don't remember telling him about that breakup in detail. Yet he spoke like he had watched it happen in real time. I asked if he had screenshots of my ex too. He said of course. It helps to understand the full story. That was the moment I felt the line snap inside my head. Not anger exactly. More like clarity. This wasn't normal curiosity. It was control disguised as interest. He reached across the table and touched my hand like he was reassuring me. I pulled my hand back. He noticed. He said he didn't mean to overwhelm me. He just likes knowing who he's dealing with. Who he's dealing with. The way he said it felt transactional. I told him I needed some air. I stood up and walked outside into the rain without even grabbing my jacket. The cold water hitting my face felt grounding. I stood under the awning and tried to slow my breathing. After a minute, he came outside too. He asked if I was seriously upset about something that was technically public information. I told him it wasn't about public or private. It was about intention. He said his intention was good. That didn't erase the folder. I asked him to delete it. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He said he would think about it, that it felt wrong to just erase all that effort. Like I was homework. I walked back inside, grabbed my bag, and told him I didn't think this was going to work. He looked genuinely hurt, like I had rejected him for something small. On the drive home, my brain kept replaying the scrolling motion of his thumb, the way the folder was labeled with my name, just my name. When I got home, I went through my own profiles and started deleting old stuff again. Then I stopped. I hated that he made me feel like I needed to erase myself. The next morning, he texted a long paragraph about how he had never connected with someone's digital evolution the way he had with mine. Digital evolution. I didn't respond. 2 days later, he sent a screenshot. It was of me walking into the cafe that night. From inside. He said he liked capturing first moments too. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even noticed him taking that. I blocked him immediately. After that, I changed all my accounts to private. I removed old tagged photos. I asked friends to untag me in certain posts. It felt exhausting, like cleaning up after something I didn't even cause. A week later, a mutual acquaintance told me Connor had asked about me. He said I was overreacting and that people curate their lives online all the time. Maybe they do. But they don't usually store someone else's past in a neatly labeled folder and call it affection. The last thing I remember clearly is the sound of rain hitting the cafe windows while he scrolled through my history like it was a slideshow. I never went back to that coffee shop at night again. I realized about 20 minutes in that I wasn't actually on a date. I was in some kind of performance review. I met Mia at a bookstore cafe across town, the kind of place that smells like paper and coffee mixed together. It was her suggestion. She said she loved quiet places where people could have real conversations. That sounded good to me. Calm, low pressure. We had been texting for a couple weeks before meeting. She seemed smart, like actually smart, not just throwing big words around. She would send me links to articles she thought I would find interesting. She asked a lot of questions about my hobbies, my job, what I wanted long term. I figured she was just curious. When I walked in, she was sitting at a small wooden table near the back, surrounded by stacks of books like she had built a little fortress. She stood up and smiled, and for a second I thought she looked kind of nervous. That feeling lasted maybe 5 minutes. We ordered drinks and sat down. At first it was normal. She asked about my week. I asked about hers. She talked about her master's program and how stressed she was about a big research paper. Then she started finishing my sentences. Not in a cute way, in a precise way. I mentioned I liked hiking on weekends when I had time, and she nodded and said I usually go to the trail near the reservoir because it's less crowded and I prefer quieter routes. I blinked at her. That was true, but I hadn't told her that part. She said she had looked at my tagged photos and noticed the background in a couple pictures. She had matched the trees to that specific trail. I laughed awkwardly and said that was some serious detective work. She smiled like she took it as a compliment. A few minutes later, I mentioned I was thinking about switching departments at work because I wanted something more stable. She tilted her head and said I had actually posted last year that I value flexibility over stability. She said it was interesting how my priorities shifted. Shifted. It felt like she had notes. I tried to brush it off, but it kept happening. Every time I said something about myself, she would correct me slightly. Not aggressively, just calmly. I said I wasn't really a morning person. She said I used to tweet about loving early gym sessions. I said I hadn't traveled much. She said I went to Colorado 3 summers ago and called it life-changing. I started to feel like I was being fact-checked in real time. At one point, I joked that I'm terrible at cooking. She smiled and said I posted a photo of homemade pasta 2 years ago and said I was proud of it. I told her that was one time. She said details matter. Details matter. The cafe suddenly felt too quiet. I could hear pages turning at other tables, the low hum of the espresso machine, the faint indie music playing overhead. Everything felt amplified because I was hyper-aware. She leaned forward and said she found it fascinating how people rewrite themselves over time. She said most people don't even realize they're doing it. I asked if she thought I was rewriting myself. She said not intentionally, just unconsciously. It felt like she was studying me, not getting to know me. Then she pulled out her phone. That's when I really knew this wasn't normal. She said she hoped I wouldn't mind, but she had made a few notes before coming because she didn't want to forget anything important. Notes. She wasn't joking. She opened her notes app and scrolled. I caught a glimpse of my name at the top of the page. Under it were bullet points. I felt my chest tighten. She started referencing things from our texts, quoting phrases I had forgotten I even typed. She compared how I described my childhood in one conversation to how I described it in another. She pointed out that I said I value independence, yet I talk to my mom daily. I said those things aren't opposites. She nodded but said it was interesting. Everything was interesting to her, like I was some case study. I tried to steer the conversation to her instead. I asked about her hobbies outside of school. She gave short answers, then turned it back on me. She asked why I stopped posting as much on social media this year. I said I just got busy. She said statistically people reduce posting when they're either overwhelmed or hiding something. I stared at her. Hiding something. I asked if she thought I was hiding something. She said she didn't know yet. That word hit hard. Yet. It was like she had already decided there was a puzzle to solve. I shifted in my chair and looked around. Everyone else in the cafe seemed relaxed, laughing quietly, flipping through books. Meanwhile, I felt like I was being examined under a microscope. She started talking about how she had read an article about attachment styles and said she thought I leaned avoidant based on my posting patterns and texting cadence. Texting cadence. Who even says that? I told her maybe I just text when I feel like it. She said that's exactly what avoidant types say. At that point, I wasn't even annoyed. I was just tired. It felt like every answer I gave was being graded. Then she did something that made it worse. She rated me. Not directly, but close. She said on a scale from 1 to 10, she would put my emotional self-awareness at around a 7, but my consistency at a 5. She said it lightly, like it was a fun personality quiz. I asked if she had rated herself too. She said she didn't need to. That silence after that was heavy. I realized I didn't feel seen. I felt categorized. I tried one last time to bring it back to normal. I asked her what she actually liked about me. She paused. Then she listed traits like she was reading off a checklist. Driven, physically active, family-oriented, moderate online presence. Moderate online presence. That one almost made me laugh. I finished my drink and told her I needed to head out soon. She seemed surprised. She said she thought this was going really well. I asked her why. She said she had gathered enough data to feel optimistic. Data. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. She stayed seated and looked up at me like I was making an illogical decision. She said growth requires discomfort. I told her I didn't sign up for a personal analysis session. She frowned slightly and said she was just being thorough. Thorough. Outside, the air felt way better than inside. I took a deep breath like I had been holding it for an hour. She followed me out a minute later and said she hoped I wouldn't misinterpret her intentions. She said she invests time into understanding people deeply before committing. I told her understanding isn't the same as correcting. She didn't respond to that. We stood there awkwardly for a few seconds. Cars passed. Someone across the street was laughing loudly. The world kept moving like normal. I said I didn't think we were a good match. She asked if that was based on emotion or logic. I said both. She nodded slowly, like she was adding that to her mental notes. I walked to my car feeling weirdly drained. Later that night, she sent a long message analyzing the date. She broke down moments where she felt I withdrew and moments where she felt she connected. It read like feedback from a group project. I didn't respond. The next day, she sent one more text saying she hoped I would reflect on my defensive tendencies. I blocked her. For weeks after that, I caught myself second-guessing random things I said, wondering if I was contradicting myself, wondering if someone could pull up an old post and prove me wrong. That's what bothered me most. Not that she researched me. Not that she remembered details. It was the way she acted like she knew me better than I knew myself. Like I was unreliable about my own life. I never went back to that bookstore cafe. Every time I think about it, I picture her phone screen with my name at the top and bullet points underneath. Like I was an assignment. The worst part wasn't that he knew things about me. It was how he knew them. I met Nathan at a rooftop bar downtown. It was one of those places with overpriced mocktails and a view of the skyline that makes everything look cooler than it actually is. My friend had set us up after insisting we would get along. She said he was calm, respectful, worked in finance, and wasn't into games. I trusted her judgment. That's probably why I didn't feel nervous walking in. He was already there, leaning against the glass railing, looking out over the city. When he turned and smiled, I felt that first wave of relief. He looked normal, clean-cut, relaxed, not intense. We ordered drinks and found a table near one of those outdoor heaters. The night was cool but not freezing, and the lights from other buildings made everything feel kind of cinematic. The first half hour felt easy. He asked about my job, actually listened, and didn't interrupt. He talked about his own work without sounding like he was bragging. He mentioned he liked routine, gym before work, coffee from the same spot every morning, that kind of thing. Then he said something small that didn't fully register at first. He said he knew I usually take my coffee black now, even though I used to add sugar. I paused. I don't remember telling him that. I asked how he knew that. He hesitated for just a second before shrugging and saying he had asked around a bit before asking me out. Asked around. I laughed lightly, thinking he meant he asked our mutual friend if I was single. He said no more than that. He said he had talked to someone who works in my building. He said he wanted to make sure I wasn't secretly dating anyone or complicated. My stomach tightened. I asked who. He said it wasn't a big deal. Just a mutual acquaintance, someone I know casually. I started running through names in my head. Coworkers, neighbors, gym staff. He kept going like this was totally fine. He said he had learned I usually stay late at work on Tuesdays, that I prefer texting over calling, that I had a rough breakup last year, but handled it maturely. That last one made my chest feel heavy. I never posted much about that breakup. So whoever he talked to had filled in details. I asked him straight up who he spoke to. He finally said it was Daniel, a guy I see at the gym sometimes. We're not close. We spot each other occasionally. That's it. Nathan said Daniel mentioned I'm consistent, that I don't flirt with random girls at the gym, that I keep to myself mostly. Hearing my life summarized like that made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just gossip. It felt like background checking. Nathan said he believed in being informed before investing time. He said too many people waste months on someone only to find out basic red flags later. Basic red flags. I asked what red flags he was looking for. He said dishonesty, aggression, hidden relationships. I asked if I had any. He smiled and said no. That's why he felt confident tonight. Confident. I suddenly didn't feel confident at all. The rooftop felt less open and more exposed, like there were invisible eyes everywhere. I kept imagining Daniel casually talking about me while doing bench presses, mentioning my schedule, my habits. Nathan said he didn't mean to make it weird. He just likes to do his homework. Homework again. Why does that word keep coming up in my life? I told him it felt invasive. He looked genuinely surprised. He said everything he learned was harmless, that Daniel didn't say anything bad. In fact, he said good things. That didn't fix it. It wasn't about good or bad. It was about consent. He admitted he had also looked through public records just to confirm my age and address matched what I told him. Public records. He said it casually, like everyone does that before a first date. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the city lights. The wind picked up slightly, and I was grateful for the distraction. He started explaining that he had dated someone before who lied about small details that turned into big problems. So now he verifies early. Verifies. That word felt cold. I asked if he told Daniel he was gathering information for a date. He said yes, and Daniel thought it was smart. That part bothered me too. Smart. Like I was some potential investment to evaluate. I asked if he planned to verify anything else. He said not unless something seemed off. Seemed off. The whole conversation felt off. I tried to change the subject, but my mind wouldn't let it go. Every time he mentioned something specific about my routine, I felt watched. Not physically watched, just observed without knowing. He asked if I was upset. I said I didn't like being discussed without knowing. He said if I had nothing to hide, it shouldn't matter. That line. That line always sounds bad. I told him privacy isn't the same as hiding. He nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. The rest of the date felt forced. I answered questions politely but stopped sharing anything new. I didn't want to give him more data to cross-reference. When the check came, he offered to pay. I let him. Not because I felt impressed, just because I wanted the night over. We walked toward the elevator that leads down from the rooftop. The ride down felt longer than usual, just the two of us standing there with soft music playing overhead. He said he hoped I understood he only did that because he was serious about finding something long-term. I said seriousness doesn't require investigation. He sighed like I was missing the point. Outside, the street was busy. Cars honking. People laughing. Normal noise. It felt grounding. He asked if he could see me again. I didn't answer right away. I thought about Daniel. About someone casually describing my habits like I wasn't there. About Nathan sitting somewhere, collecting those details and building a profile. I said I needed to think about it. He nodded and said he respected that. The next morning, I went to the gym earlier than usual. Part of me didn't want to see Daniel, but part of me needed to. He was there. I waited until he finished his set and asked if he had talked to Nathan. He looked confused at first. Then he laughed and said yeah, just briefly. He said Nathan seemed like a solid guy and wanted to know if I was decent. Decent. I asked what he told him. He shrugged and said just basic stuff. That I show up regularly, that I seemed chill, that I went through a breakup but didn't spiral publicly. Publicly. That word again. I told him I would have appreciated a heads up. He looked slightly embarrassed and said he didn't think it was a big deal. That phrase keeps repeating too. Not a big deal. It felt like I was the only one who thought it was. I left the gym feeling irritated in a way that stayed with me all day. Later that afternoon, Nathan texted asking if I had thought about a second date. I stared at the message for a while. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't rude. He probably thought he was being responsible. But I kept thinking about how he started things by verifying me through someone else instead of just talking to me. I finally replied and said I didn't think it was a good fit. He asked if it was because of the background checking. I said yes. He responded with a long explanation about how trust is built on transparency. I didn't answer, because transparency goes both ways. And he never told me he was collecting information before doing it. The last thing I remember clearly is standing on that rooftop with the city spread out behind him while he listed facts about me like bullet points. It didn't feel like he wanted to know me. It felt like he wanted to confirm me. I knew the night was going to be strange when she asked to hold my phone before we even ordered food. Not to check the time. Not to take a picture. Just to hold it. I met Ella at a late-night diner off the highway, the kind with cracked leather boots and neon lights that buzz quietly if you listen too hard. She picked the place because she said she liked spots that were open all night, said it made things feel less rushed. We had been texting for about 3 weeks. She was funny in a dry way, not overly flirty. She would randomly disappear for hours and then come back with long messages about her day. I didn't think much of it. People get busy. When I walked in, she was already sitting in a booth near the back. She waved me over with a small smile. She looked calm, almost too calm. We ordered burgers and milkshakes. Normal first date food. Nothing fancy. For the first 20 minutes, it actually felt okay. She asked about my family. I asked about hers. She talked about how she moved around a lot growing up. Different cities. Different schools. She said it made her careful with people. Careful. That word stuck. At one point, my phone buzzed on the table. Just a random notification from a group chat. I glanced at it without opening it. She noticed. She didn't say anything right away, just watched. A few minutes later, she leaned forward and said she believed trust should be built immediately. I nodded slowly, not sure where she was going with that. Then she said she had a small request. She asked if she could look through my phone for a minute. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She said not in a suspicious way, just to build trust. She said it's easier to relax when there are no secrets. I stared at her, trying to read her expression. She looked completely serious. I asked what exactly she wanted to see. She said just my messages. Social media. Nothing crazy. Just to confirm I was who I said I was. Confirm. That word again. I told her that felt a little intense for a first date. She shrugged slightly and said that's why most relationships fail. People wait too long to be transparent. Transparent. I picked up my glass just to have something to do. My mind was racing. It wasn't that I had anything to hide. It was the principle of it. The idea of handing over my phone like I was being searched. I told her I wasn't comfortable with that. She leaned back and crossed her arms. She said it was interesting how defensive people get when they have nothing to hide. That line hit like a brick. I said it's not about hiding. It's about privacy. She said privacy creates distance. Distance. Everything she said felt rehearsed. The food arrived, which should have shifted the mood, but it didn't. The tension just sat there between us like a third person at the table. She picked at her fries while watching me. Then she tried again. She said she would show me your phone first if that made it fair. She picked it up and unlocked it, sliding it across the table slightly. I didn't touch it. I told her I didn't need to go through her phone and trust her. She smiled faintly and said that was sweet, but unrealistic. Unrealistic. I started noticing little things. How steady her voice was. How she barely blinked while making her point. It didn't feel emotional. It felt strategic. She asked if I had ever cheated. I said no. She asked if I had ever lied in a relationship. I said everyone has lied about something small at some point. She nodded like that was evidence of something bigger. Then she reached across the table and lightly tapped my phone with her finger. She said trust is proven, not promised. Proven. I felt my chest tighten. I imagined handing her my phone and her scrolling through old conversations, private jokes with friends, random messages, things taken out of context. It wasn't about guilt. It was about control. I told her again I wasn't going to do that. Her expression shifted slightly. Not anger, more like disappointment. She said she had been honest from the start about what she needs to feel secure. I asked if she tells everyone on the first date. She said yes. I wondered how many people had actually handed their phones over. The diner suddenly felt too bright. The neon lights reflected off the metal napkin holder. I could hear a truck engine idling outside. She took a sip of her milkshake and said she doesn't believe in guessing games. She said if someone refuses transparency early, it usually means something's wrong. I asked if she thought something was wrong with me. She didn't answer directly, just tilted her head. That silence said enough. I felt frustration building, but I kept my voice steady. I told her trust takes time. It's built through actions, not forced inspections. She said time allows deception. That one almost made me laugh, but not in a good way. It felt like she'd already decided that withholding my phone meant I was hiding something. Halfway through the meal, she pushed her plate aside and said she didn't want to waste either of our time. I agreed. She asked one last time, calmer now, almost gentle. She said if I care about making this work, I'll let her see. That phrasing bothered me the most. Like this was a test I was failing. I picked up my phone, not to hand it to her, but to put it in my pocket. I told her I wasn't interested in proving myself like that. She stared at me for a long second. Then she nodded slowly. She said that told her everything she needed to know. I asked what that was. She said I value control over connection. Control. The irony almost made my head spin. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. She didn't try to stop me. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I took a deep breath and felt my shoulders finally relax. Before I got in my car, my phone buzzed again. A text from her. She said she hopes one day I understand that trust requires courage. I didn't respond. On the drive home, I kept replaying the moment she tapped my phone. The casual way she acted like access to my entire digital life was just a small favor. The next morning, she sent one more message. She said she had been cheated on before and promised herself she would never ignore red flags again. Red flags. Apparently, I was one. I typed out a reply explaining that boundaries aren't red flags. Then I deleted it, because it wouldn't change anything. A week later, I ran into her at a grocery store near my apartment. She saw me first, gave a small nod, no smile. I nodded back. That was it. No drama, no yelling, just two people who clearly wanted different definitions of trust. But I still think about how quickly she tried to test me. Like the date wasn't about getting to know each other. It was about passing inspection. The day hadn't even started and he was already asking for proof. I met Jack outside a food truck festival near the waterfront. It was one of those summer nights where the air smells like fried food and sunscreen even though the sun's already down. There were string lights hanging between poles, music playing from a speaker somewhere, and way too many people packed into one space. We'd have been talking for about 2 weeks. He seemed chill. Into fitness, worked in tech, posted a lot of gym progress pictures and motivational quotes. Nothing alarming. He actually seemed more laid back than most guys I'd talked to. When I walked up, he smiled, gave me a quick hug, and said he was glad I made it safely. That part was normal. Then he asked if I could do something real quick before we grabbed food. I thought he meant move somewhere quieter. Instead, he pulled out his phone and said we should share live locations with each other. Just like that. I laughed because I'd assumed he was joking. He wasn't. He said it would make things easier, safer, more transparent. He said nowadays you can never be too careful. I asked careful about what? He shrugged and said people lie. People disappear. People say they're one place and they're somewhere else. We were literally standing in front of each other. I told him that. He said yeah, but for the future. Future? We hadn't even gotten tacos yet. He opened his Maps app and held his phone slightly toward me, like he expected me to mirror him. He said it would show that neither of us had anything to hide. That sentence felt familiar in the worst way. Nothing to hide. I told him I don't normally share my location with people unless I've known them for a long time. He said it's the problem. People wait too long and then get hurt. I asked if he shares his location with everyone he dates. He said yes. It's his rule now. Rule. That word made me uncomfortable. We started walking toward one of the food trucks, and he kept glancing at me like he was waiting for me to pull my phone out. The crowd was loud around us. Someone nearby dropped a drink, and it splashed on the pavement. Music thumped from a speaker near the stage area. It should have felt fun. Instead, I felt tense. He tried explaining it like it was logical. He said if we share locations, then if either of us says we're at work or home, the other can see it. No guessing. No anxiety. I asked why there would be anxiety if there's trust. He said trust is built with proof. Proof again. We finally got our food and sat at one of those long picnic tables with strangers on either side of us. I was trying to focus on the food, but he brought it up again. He said it's weird to him when someone refuses something that simple. Simple. I asked if he thought I was being weird. He said not weird, just guarded. Guarded. I took a bite of my food just to avoid responding immediately. My mind kept running ahead. If I shared my location, that meant he could see when I left my apartment, when I went to the gym, when I visited my parents, every random errand. All from a first date. He leaned in slightly and said he would feel more comfortable knowing we were on the same page about transparency. Same page. It felt like he had memorized a script. I asked what happens if I don't want to share it. He shrugged and said that would tell him something. Tell him what? He didn't answer directly. The conversation drifted for a few minutes to safer topics. Work, travel, music, but every so often he circled back. He said last year he dated someone who lied about working late but was actually meeting someone else. He found out because she accidentally shared her location once and forgot to turn it off. Accidentally. That detail bothered me. It sounded less like he wanted trust and more like he wanted surveillance. He asked if I'd ever lied about where I was. I said no. He nodded and said then sharing shouldn't be a problem. That logic made my head spin. It wasn't about past lies. It was about control in the present. The festival lights flickered slightly as a generator hummed. Kids were running around with glow sticks. The atmosphere was supposed to feel light. Instead, I felt like I was negotiating terms of a contract. He pulled his phone out again and said we could just try it for a week. Try it. Like it was a free trial. I finally told him straight up that I wasn't comfortable with that. He stared at me for a second, then looked down at his food. He said he didn't get why people are so attached to privacy. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Attached to privacy. Like it was some unnecessary habit. I told him privacy isn't secrecy. He shook his head slightly and said, in his opinion, they overlap. That's when I knew we weren't compatible. The rest of the day felt flat. We finished eating in near silence. He checked his phone a couple times. maybe out of habit, maybe to make a point. When we stood up to leave, he asked one last time. He said if this goes anywhere, it's something he requires. Requires. I told him that it probably wasn't going anywhere. He nodded slowly, not angry, just firm. He said he respects honesty. We walked toward the parking lot together, but there was a distance now. Not physical distance, but something heavier. Before we split off to our cars, he said he hopes I find someone who matches my comfort level. Comfort level. It sounded polite, but it felt like a judgment. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how casual he was about it, like asking for fries, like asking to split the bill. Share location. No big deal. The next morning, he texted me. He said he had been thinking and maybe he came on too strong, but he still believes couples should have access to each other's locations at all times. At all times. I replied and said I don't believe in starting something with rules like that. He didn't argue. He just said fair enough. A few days later, I saw on social media that he posted something about modern dating lacking transparency. Transparency again. I wondered how many other girls had been asked the same thing. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't yell. He didn't insult me. But the idea of someone expecting constant access to where I am from the very beginning stayed with me. We were standing in a crowded festival with hundreds of people around us. And somehow I still felt tracked. I knew it was going to be different when she brought a notebook. Not a small one either. A full-size spiral notebook with tabs sticking out of the side like she was about to run a workshop. I met Freya at a mini golf place that had neon lights and loud music playing from speakers mounted in the corners. It was her idea. She said she liked dates that had structure. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured she just didn't want an awkward dinner. We had been messaging for about 2 weeks. She came across confident, maybe a little intense, but in a productive way. She worked in marketing and talked a lot about goals, 5-year plans, vision boards, that kind of thing. When I got there, she was already standing near the entrance holding 2 putters and the notebook. I laughed and asked if she was planning to take notes on my golf skills. She smiled and said something like, "You'll see." That should have been my first warning. We started playing. The place was packed with kids running around, couples laughing, balls bouncing off walls. It should have felt relaxed. Instead, after the first hole, she flipped open the notebook. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She drew a small box on the page and wrote my name at the top. I asked what she was doing. She said she likes to evaluate compatibility in real time so she doesn't waste months figuring out basic things. Evaluate. That word made my stomach drop a little. At first, it seemed harmless. She asked what I looked for in a partner. I answered honestly. Kindness, stability, someone who communicates. She nodded and wrote something down. Then she asked how I handle conflict. I said it depends on the situation. She paused and said that answer was vague. Then she wrote something else down. I felt heat rise to my face. I tried to laugh it off and asked if I was passing so far. She said she doesn't believe in pass or fail, just scoring. Scoring. She actually drew little numbers next to categories. Communication, ambition, emotional availability. I stared at the page and felt like I was back in school waiting for grades to be posted. We moved to the next hole. I made a shot in 2 tries. She clapped lightly and said competitive spirit is a good sign. Then she asked how much I make. Just like that. I hesitated. She said finances are important and there's no point pretending they're not. I gave her a general answer without exact numbers. She frowned slightly and wrote something down again. The music in the background felt louder suddenly. The neon lights made everything look fake and overstimulating. I asked if she was serious with the notebook thing. She said absolutely. She's learned the hard way that vibes aren't enough. Vibes aren't enough. She asked about my long-term goals. I answered. She rated them. Rated them. On a scale from 1 to 10. At one point, she asked how often I talked to my parents. I said a couple times a week. She nodded approvingly and wrote a higher number next to family orientation. I felt like I was watching someone build a profile on me in real time. Other couples around us were laughing, taking selfies, joking about bad shots. Meanwhile, I was being assessed. After the fourth hole, she asked about past relationships. I gave a brief summary. Nothing dramatic. She interrupted halfway through and asked what I learned from my last breakup. Learned. I told her I realized communication matters more than being right. She smiled and wrote a number down. Then she said that answer bumped me up a point. Bumped me up. Like I had just leveled up in a game. I tried flipping it back on her. I asked if she had a scorecard for herself. She said she doesn't need one because she already knows where she stands. That line stuck with me. Already knows where she stands. It didn't feel confident. It felt rigid. We finished the course, and I think she tallied everything at the end. She actually added the numbers together. I stood there holding the putter while she did math. She looked up and said I was at a solid 7.8 overall. 7.8. I didn't know whether to laugh or walk away. I asked what would make it a 9. She said consistency and clear financial transparency. Financial transparency again. She suggested that on our next date, we could go over more detailed goals and expectations. Go over. Like we were drafting a contract. We sat down at a plastic table near the exit. She closed the notebook but kept her hand on it. She said she does this because she refuses to settle. She said too many people waste time with potential instead of measurable compatibility. Measurable compatibility. The word sounded so clinical. I told her relationships aren't job interviews. She said they kind of are. That was the moment I checked out mentally. It wasn't even that she wanted clarity. It was the way she reduced everything to numbers. Like attraction, humor, connection, all of it could be calculated. She asked if I wanted to know her score. I shrugged. She said she rates herself a 9.2. Of course she did. I asked how she calculated that. She said self-awareness and ambition weigh heavily in her formula. Formula. I felt I was stuck at a business seminar instead of a date. When we finally walked out to the parking lot, she said she was impressed overall and thought there was potential. Potential. That word again. I told her I wasn't really into being evaluated like that. She looked confused. She said she thought I would appreciate the transparency. Transparency. That word follows me everywhere. I told her I prefer getting to know someone naturally. She nodded, but didn't look convinced. She said natural often leads to disappointment. We stood there for a few seconds in silence, cars pulling in and out, the glow from the mini golf sign flickering behind us. She asked if I wanted to schedule a follow-up date. Schedule. I said I'd think about it. On the drive home, I replayed the night in my head, the way she scribbled numbers, the way she tilted her head when I answered something imperfectly. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't loud. It was structured. Too structured. The next morning, she texted me a photo of the scorecard. She had taken a picture of the page. Under my name were categories and numbers. At the bottom, she wrote strong foundation, needs refinement. Needs refinement. I stared at that phrase for a long time. I didn't reply. A few hours later, she followed up asking if I had feedback for her too. I almost laughed. I typed out that I'm not interested in continuing. Then I deleted it and simply said I don't think we're a match. She responded with a short message saying she respects efficiency. Efficiency. That word fit her perfectly. I blocked her number after that. Sometimes I think about that 7.8. Not because I care about the number, but because for an hour and a half I wasn't a person to her. I was a score. I should have paid attention to the spreadsheet. Not kidding. There was an actual spreadsheet. I met Oliver at a quiet wine bar downtown that had dim lighting and those tiny candles on every table. It was the kind of place people go when they want to look sophisticated without trying too hard. He picked it. Said he liked places where you could actually hear each other talk. We'd been texting for about 3 weeks. He seemed organized. That's the word I would use before the date. Organized. He replied at consistent times. He asked thoughtful questions. He even suggested the date 3 days in advance instead of last minute. I thought that was refreshing. When I walked in, he was already seated at a small corner table. He stood up immediately when he saw me, shook my hand first, then laughed and turned it into a half hug. It was awkward but kind of endearing. The first part of the date was actually nice. We talked about work, family, random travel stories. He told me about a hiking trip he took last year. I told him about a beach trip I went on with friends. Normal stuff. He was attentive, made eye contact, didn't check his phone. Then about an hour in, after we ordered a second round of drinks, he said he wanted to show me something. I assumed it was a photo from one of his trips. Instead, he pulled out his laptop. A full laptop. I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He opened it right there on the tiny wine bar table and turned the screen slightly toward me. It was a spreadsheet. At the top, in bold text, was my name. My stomach dropped. I asked what that was. He smiled like he was about to reveal a surprise party. He said he believes in intentional dating. He said too many people drift aimlessly and then wonder why nothing works out, so he started planning ahead. Planning ahead. He scrolled down. There were columns labeled month 1, month 2, month 3, all the way to month 6. Under each month were ideas, specific date ideas, specific conversations he wanted to have, milestones. Month 1. Build comfort and shared routine. Weekly dinner. Light physical affection. Month 2. Introduce to close friends. Short weekend trip. Month 3. Discuss exclusivity formally. Evaluate long-term compatibility. Evaluate. The word hit me like a brick. I stared at the screen trying to process what I was looking at. He kept talking like this was romantic. He said he had thought about places we could go. There was a note about a music festival in August, a cooking class in September, a road trip in October. He had mapped it out. 6 months of my life. I asked when you made this. He said last week, after he felt we were aligning well over text. Aligning well. I told him we hadn't even met in person yet. He nodded and said exactly. That's why he likes to be proactive. Proactive. I felt like I was sitting in a board meeting instead of on a date. He scrolled further. There was even a column labeled potential challenges. Under it, he had listed things like schedule conflicts, communication styles, and stress management differences. I couldn't tell if I wanted to laugh or leave. He said he's not saying it's set in stone. It's flexible. But he likes having a framework. Framework? I asked if he does this for every girl. He said only the ones he sees serious potential with. Serious potential? We had exchanged maybe 100 texts. I looked around the wine bar. Other couples were leaning close, laughing softly. The candle between us flickered slightly, reflecting off his screen. He kept explaining how relationships fail because people don't plan. They rely on emotion instead of structure. Structure again. I told him relationships aren't project timelines. He said, why not? Why not? That's when it hit me that he wasn't joking at all. He genuinely believed this was a smart move. He even had a tab labeled future integration. Under it were notes about meeting families around month 5 if everything progressed smoothly. Meeting families. We hadn't even finished our second drink. I asked what happens if I don't follow the timeline. He smiled and said then we adjust. Adjust. Like I was a variable in an equation. He closed the laptop finally and leaned back in his chair, looking proud of himself. He said he knows it might seem intense, but he's tired of wasting time. Wasting time. I felt pressure building in my chest. It wasn't that planning dates is bad. It was the assumption that I was automatically part of this 6-month arc, without asking me. He asked what I thought. I chose my words carefully. I said it feels like you planned a relationship before knowing if we even click in real life. He nodded thoughtfully, like he was analyzing my response. He said chemistry is important, but direction matters more. Direction. The rest of the conversation felt strained. Every topic circled back to future planning. He asked where I see myself living long term, whether I consider relocating, how soon I'd want to settle down. It felt like I was filling out an application. When the check came, he insisted on paying, said it was an investment. Investment. That word made my skin crawl. Outside, the night air felt cool and grounding. Cars passed. People walked by laughing. He asked if I'd be open to reviewing the spreadsheet together sometime and customizing it to fit both of us. Customizing it. I told him I think relationships should grow naturally. He said natural growth still benefits from guidance. Guidance. I could see how proud he was of this system, like he had cracked a code. But all I felt was boxed in. I told him I appreciated the effort, but it felt too structured for me. He looked disappointed, but not shocked. He said most people react that way at first. At first. Like I'd come around. He asked if I'd at least consider giving it a month trial. Trial. That was it for me. I told him I don't want to be part of a 6-month forecast. He paused for a second, then nodded slowly. He said he respects clarity. Clarity. We said goodbye politely. No hug this time. On the drive home, I kept picturing that spreadsheet. My name at the top. Columns stretching out into months I hadn't agreed to. The next morning he emailed me. He emailed. He sent a PDF version of the plan in case I wanted to review it without pressure. Without pressure. I stared at the attachment for a long time. I didn't open it. I replied with a short message saying I don't think we're compatible. He responded with a calm paragraph thanking me for my honesty and wishing me alignment elsewhere. Alignment. That word fit in perfectly. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't insult me. He didn't argue. But the idea of someone mapping out half a year of my life before even knowing how I'd laugh in person felt suffocating. We had one date. Just candles and wine and small talk. But in his mind, we were already in month 3. I found out halfway through dessert that I had already been on a date with her. I just didn't know it at the time. I met Holly at a small arcade bar near my apartment. It had old pinball machines, sticky floors, and bright flashing lights that made everything feel chaotic in a fun way. She suggested it because she said first dates should have distractions in case conversation gets awkward. That should have been my first hint. We had matched about a month earlier and talked on and off. She was sarcastic, quick with comebacks, and seemed easygoing. Nothing about her messages felt intense or overly serious. When I walked in, she was leaning against a racing game machine, scrolling on her phone. She looked up, smiled, and gave me a quick hug. Normal start. We grabbed drinks and started playing air hockey. She was competitive, but in a playful way. She trash-talked a little when she scored. I actually felt relaxed. Half an hour in, we were sitting at a high table near the back, sharing fries and talking about past dating stories. She asked if I'd ever been tested before. I laughed and said like in school. She said no in relationships. I shrugged and said I don't think so. She stared at me for a second like she was debating something. Then she said she had a confession. That word always shifts the mood. She said before we met, she created a fake profile to talk to me. I blinked. I genuinely thought I misheard her. She said she wanted to see how I would behave if I thought I was talking to someone else. She said it was just to make sure I was consistent. Consistent. I asked what kind of profile. She said it was a random girl. Different name. Different photos. Someone who wouldn't be connected to her. My stomach dropped slowly. I asked how long she did that. She said about a week. A week. She said she messaged me first to see if I would flirt aggressively or say anything inappropriate. I tried to remember if any random profiles had messaged me recently. Then it clicked. There had been a girl who messaged me out of nowhere asking basic questions. I had replied politely, but eventually stopped responding because it felt pointless. I asked if that was her. She smiled slightly and said yeah. I felt my face go hot. She said she was relieved because I didn't flirt heavily and didn't ask for anything weird. Relieved. I asked what she would have done if I had. She shrugged and said she wouldn't be sitting here tonight. The arcade noises felt louder suddenly. Machines beeping. People laughing. Glasses clinking behind the bar. I asked why she didn't just ask me directly about boundaries. She said people lie when they know they're being evaluated. Evaluated. That word again. She said she prefers real-world tests over promises. Real-world tests. I stared at her, trying to process how calm she looked admitting this. She said it wasn't malicious. She just wanted to protect herself. She said too many guys act differently when they think no one is watching. That line stuck with me. No one is watching. I told her that creating a fake identity to test someone feels dishonest. She tilted her head and said it's strategic. Strategic. I asked if she does that with everyone. She said yes, at least in the early stages. Early stages. We hadn't even finished our fries. She said it's like quality control. Better to find out early than later. Quality control. I actually laughed at that, but not because it was funny. It felt surreal. I asked if she ever thought about how that might feel for the other person. She said if the other person has nothing to hide, they'll never know. That sentence made my chest tighten. I said, but I do know. She paused. For the first time, she looked slightly unsure. She said she didn't expect me to take it personally. Personally. I told her it's hard not to when someone pretends to be someone else just to see how you behave. She said she was just gathering information. Information. Everything felt transactional again. I thought about that week of messages, the way the fake profile had tried to steer the conversation slightly flirtier, the way I had kept it casual. It suddenly felt gross. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I was unknowingly part of an experiment. She reached for her drink and said she thought I'd appreciate her honesty now. Honesty now. After the deception. I asked what else she tested. She said nothing major, just messaging tone and responsiveness. Just. That word made it smaller than it was. I asked if she deleted the fake profile. She nodded and said yeah after she confirmed I passed. Passed. I felt like I was back in Freya's scorecard situation. Only this time I hadn't even known I was being graded. The rest of the conversation felt off balance. I kept thinking about how easily she slipped into another identity, how she crafted a persona just to watch me. She said she's been cheated on before and promised herself she'd never ignore warning signs again. Warning signs. Apparently I was one she needed to clear. I asked what happens if someone finds out and feels weird about it. She shrugged and said then they're probably not secure enough. Secure enough. That did it. I told her it's not about insecurity. It's about trust starting with honesty. She rolled her eyes slightly and said trust is earned. Earned. The irony almost made me dizzy. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. She looked surprised. She said I thought you'd at least finish the game. Finish the game. That phrasing felt way too accurate. I told her I don't want to date someone who runs secret tests. She said it's not secret anymore. Not anymore. Outside, the night air felt cooler than expected. I could still hear the arcade noises faintly through the door. She followed me out and said I'm overreacting. Overreacting. I didn't argue. I just said I don't think this is going to work. She crossed her arms and said fine. At least now she knows I'm sensitive. Sensitive. I almost laughed again. We went our separate ways. On the walk home, I kept replaying the fake messages in my head, the questions that profile asked, the subtle way it tried to push the conversation. It felt manipulative. The next day, she texted me saying she didn't mean to upset me and that her methods might be unconventional but effective. Effective. I didn't respond. Later that week, I noticed a new random profile viewed my story. I don't know if it was her, but I blocked it anyway. It wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no public scene. Just the realization that I had unknowingly been tested before even meeting her. One date at an arcade bar. And somehow I had already taken an exam I didn't sign up for. I knew it was going downhill the second he said he had already talked to my ex. Not stalked online. Not scrolled through old photos. Actually talked. I met Theo at a quiet rooftop cafe attached to a hotel downtown. It was early evening, golden light hitting the buildings, soft music playing in the background, the kind of setting that's supposed to feel calm and mature. We had been talking for about 3 weeks. He seemed thoughtful, a little serious, maybe, but steady. He worked in consulting and said he values transparency and communication more than anything. That sounded fine to me. When I got there, he was sitting at a small table near the edge of the rooftop, hands folded like he was waiting for an interview to begin. He stood out, shook my hand, then smiled and relaxed a little. The first part of the date was smooth. We talked about work stress, family traditions, random childhood stories. He listened carefully, almost too carefully. About 40 minutes in, he asked about my last relationship. That's not unusual on a first date, so I gave a brief overview. We dated for a couple of years. It ended because we wanted different things. No drama, just incompatibility. He nodded slowly. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. He said he appreciated my version of events, but he also liked to hear both sides. Both sides. I frowned and asked what he meant. He calmly took a sip of his coffee and said he had spoken to my previous partner before agreeing to meet me. My chest tightened instantly. I asked how that was even possible. He said it wasn't that hard. My ex's profile is public. It still follows some of the same people. A few messages later, he had a phone call scheduled. A phone call. I stared at him, trying to figure out if this was a joke. It wasn't. He said he believes in due diligence before investing emotionally. He said breakups often come with conflicting narratives, and he prefers clarity. Clarity. I asked what exactly he asked my ex. He said general things. How I handle conflict. Whether I was honest. Whether there were unresolved issues. Unresolved issues. The rooftop suddenly felt too open, like there was nowhere to hide. I asked why he didn't just ask me directly. He said people naturally present themselves in the best light early on. Best light. That sentence hit hard. I told him that going behind my back to interview someone from my past felt invasive. He looked genuinely confused. He said it wasn't behind my back. It was before we committed to anything serious. Committed. We hadn't even had appetizers yet. I asked what my ex said. He hesitated. That hesitation told me it wasn't all glowing praise. He said overall it was positive, but there were mentions of stubbornness and emotional distance at times. Hearing my personality traits relayed through him like that made my face burn. I asked if he thought that was fair. He said he's still forming his own opinion. Forming his own opinion. Based on a reference check. I couldn't believe this was real. He said he doesn't see it as strange. In his line of work, background checks are normal. He said relationships are just as serious as business partnerships. Business partnerships. There it was. I told him I'm not a job applicant. He said no, but compatibility matters deeply, so why not verify? Verify. That word again. The server came over to ask if we wanted dessert. I almost laughed at the normalcy of that question compared to what we were discussing. I said no. Theo continued calmly like we were discussing the weather. He said he didn't tell my ex anything personal about me. Just ask questions. He said it was respectful. Respectful. I felt the opposite. I asked what would have happened if my ex had said something negative. He shrugged slightly and said then he might have reconsidered meeting me. Reconsidered. So this entire date only existed because my ex gave a decent review. That realization made something shift inside me. I asked if he planned to contact other people from my life too. He said only if necessary. Necessary. The way he said it made it sound like procedure. I looked out over the city for a moment, trying to calm down. Cars moved below. People walked on the sidewalks. Everything normal. Meanwhile, my past had been discussed without me knowing. He asked if I was upset. I said yes. He looked surprised. He said he thought I would appreciate his thoroughness. Thoroughness. Why does everyone think invasiveness equals effort? I told him relationships are built on trust between two people, not interviews with third parties. He said trust should be informed. Informed. I asked if he would be okay with me calling one of his exes to verify his character. He paused. That pause was loud. He said it depends on the intention. I said my intention would be the same as his. He didn't answer. Silence sat between us for a few seconds. I realized something in that moment. He didn't trust me before even giving me a chance. And that's not something I can fix. He said he was trying to protect himself from wasting time. Wasting time. I stood up slowly. He looked confused. I told him I don't think this is going to work. He asked if I was ending things over a phone call. Over a phone call. Like it was small. I said it's not just a phone call. It's the mindset behind it. He looked disappointed but not angry. He said he values logic over emotion. Logic over emotion. That phrase explained everything. Outside the hotel, the air felt cooler than I expected. I took a deep breath and felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Before I got to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from my ex. It said, "Hey, sorry, that was weird. Some guy called asking about you." I didn't know if I should mention it. My hands clenched around the phone. So my ex hadn't even known it was a secret. Theo never told me. He just assumed it was fine. I replied to my ex saying thanks for telling me. Then I blocked Theo. The next morning, he sent one email. An email. He said he was disappointed I reacted emotionally instead of rationally. Reacted emotionally. Like that was a flaw. He said he still believes in thorough vetting before commitment. Vetting. That word sealed it. I didn't respond. For days after, I kept thinking about how easily he crossed that boundary, how calmly he described it, how he believed it was smart. It wasn't dramatic. No yelling. No scene. Just a quiet rooftop and a calm voice telling me my past had already been reviewed. One date. And somehow I had already been fact-checked by someone who claimed to value transparency. I knew it was going to be bad when she said the word prove. Not share. Not explain. Prove. I met Ivy at a quiet dessert cafe that stayed open late and specialized in over-the-top milkshakes with candy stuck all over the glass. It was her idea. She said she liked sweet places because it kept things light. We had been talking for about 2 weeks. She came off intense, but in a charming way at first. Lots of questions. Fast replies. She said she hated dishonesty more than anything. Said she had zero tolerance for lies. I didn't think much of it. When I walked into the cafe, she was already seated at a small table near the window. The place smelled like sugar and coffee. Soft pop music played overhead. She smiled wide when she saw me and stood up to hug me. The hug was tight, a little too tight. We ordered ridiculous milkshakes and sat down. At first, it felt normal. She asked about my week. I asked about hers. She told me about a coworker she didn't trust and how she always checks receipts when something feels off. Checks receipts. That phrase stuck with me even before everything happened. About 30 minutes in, the conversation shifted. She asked if I'm active on social media. I said yeah, casually. She asked if I've ever hidden anything online. I laughed and said like what? She didn't laugh back. She said people present curated versions of themselves and she believes in full honesty from the beginning. Full honesty. I nodded slowly, not sensing where this was going yet. Then she leaned forward slightly and said she had a small request. That phrase again. Small request. She asked if I could log into my social accounts in front of her, just to prove I was honest about everything. My brain actually stalled for a second. I thought maybe she meant show her my profile. No. She meant fully sign in, scroll through messages, show her nothing suspicious was there. The milkshake in front of me suddenly felt way too sweet. I asked why she needed that. She said she's been lied to before. Multiple times. Guys saying they're single but hiding conversations. She said she promised herself she'd never ignore signs again. Ignore signs. I told her I'm not those guys. She said that's what they all say. That lie hit hard. I said trust isn't built by demanding passwords. She said she wasn't asking for passwords, just to log in once so she could see. See what? She said see that there aren't secret accounts. See that I'm not messaging other girls behind her back. Behind her back. We were on our first date. I pointed that out. She said exactly. This is when honesty matters most. Most. I looked around the cafe. Couples laughing. Friends taking pictures of their desserts. Everything normal. Meanwhile, I felt like I was about to be interrogated. She reached across the table and lightly touched my hand. She said if you have nothing to hide, this should be easy. That sentence always sounds worse than people think. I pulled my hand back slowly. I told her I'm not comfortable logging into private accounts in front of someone I just met. Her expression shifted instantly, from warm to cold. She said interesting. Interesting. Like she was confirming a suspicion. I said it's not about hiding. It's about boundaries. She shook her head slightly. She said boundaries are often excuses. Excuses. My chest felt tight. I asked if she would log into her accounts for me. She hesitated for half a second, then said yes. But the way she said it didn't feel genuine. It felt like a trap. She pulled out her phone and opened one app, scrolling quickly through her feed. She said, "See, nothing to hide." That wasn't the same as what she was asking for me. She wanted full access. Messages, DMs, everything. She said she needs to know she's not wasting time. Wasting time. Why does that phrase keep repeating? I told her relationships aren't audits. She didn't smile. She said trust requires evidence. Evidence. I felt like I was on trial. I imagined handing her my phone, watching her scroll through years of conversations, private jokes, old group chats, random things that could be misunderstood. It wasn't about guilt. It was about control. I told her again no. Firmly. Her face hardened. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. She said refusal says more than compliance ever could. That line made something click in my head. There was no winning here. If I logged in, I'd be setting a precedent. If I didn't, I was guilty by default. I pushed my milkshake slightly away. I said, "This doesn't feel healthy." She asked what part. I said the part where I have to prove my innocence before we even built anything. She laughed softly, but it wasn't warm. She said innocence isn't proven, it's demonstrated. Demonstrated. I felt drained. The cafe lights seemed brighter, the music louder, everything sharper. She said she thought I was different. Different. I asked different from what? She didn't answer directly. She just looked at my phone sitting on the table. That look said everything. I stood up slowly. She looked surprised. She said, "You're leaving." I said, "Yeah." She asked if I'm really walking away over something so simple. So simple. I told her it's not simple to me. She shook her head and said, "You're choosing secrecy over connection." Secrecy. That word followed me out the door. Outside, the air felt cool and real compared to the sugar-filled cafe. Before I even reached my car, my phone buzzed. A message from her. It said, "I hope one day you understand that transparency is love." Transparency is love. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I blocked her number. The next day, she sent a follow request from a private account. No profile picture. No posts. Just a blank page. I declined it. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No scene. Just a first date that turned into a demand for access. We were supposed to be sharing milkshakes and laughing about random stuff. Instead, I was asked to unlock my entire digital life like it was an entry requirement. One date. And somehow I was already expected to prove I deserved trust.